The history of Imperial robots begins in an age so distant that even the Mechanicus archives preserve only fragments of its glory. During the dark age of technology, humanity reached heights of scientific achievement that would never again be equaled. This period, spanning roughly from the 15th to the 25th millennium, saw mankind spread across the stars in a golden wave of expansion and discovery. At the heart of this expansion stood technological marvels that the Imperium of the 41st millennium can barely comprehend, let alone recreate. The standard template construct system represented the pinnacle of human ingenuity during this epoch. These databases contained complete manufacturing blueprints and instructions for every conceivable technology that a human colony might require, from agricultural equipment to defensive weapons, from medical devices to construction machinery. The SDC databases were designed to be foolproof, allowing even colonists with minimal technical knowledge to produce sophisticated equipment. Among the thousands of templates stored within these systems were comprehensive designs for robotic workers, soldiers, and specialized automata. These robots were not simple machines, but sophisticated constructs capable of operating in environments that would kill unprotected humans within moments. The robots produced from SDC templates came in countless configurations. Mining robots burrowed through asteroid fields, extracting precious minerals with tireless efficiency. Construction robots assembled habitation domes on airless moons and toxic worlds. Agricultural robots tended vast hydroponic farms in the holds of generation ships. Military robots stood guard over human settlements on frontier worlds, where hostile xeno species threatened colonists. Each robot was optimized for its specific function, incorporating technologies that modern tech priests would consider borderline heretical in their complexity and effectiveness. What distinguished these permitted robots from the abominations that would later bring catastrophe was the nature of their animating intelligence. The machine spirits that guided these constructs operated within carefully defined parameters. They were not true artificial intelligences capable of independent thought, creativity, or self-directed evolution. Instead, they functioned as sophisticated expert systems, responding to environmental inputs and executing programmed responses with superhuman precision and speed. A mining robot could identify valuable ore deposits, calculate optimal extraction patterns, and adjust its techniques based on geological conditions, but it could not question why it mined or conceive of doing anything other than mining. This distinction mattered greatly to the techno-savants of the Dark Age. They understood that true artificial intelligence represented a fundamental threat to human supremacy. A machine that could think, truly think, might eventually decide that humanity was unnecessary or even detrimental to its goals. The architects of the SDC system built in multiple safeguards to prevent their robots from crossing the threshold into genuine consciousness. Neural inhibitors limited processing capacity. Hardwired imperatives ensured obedience to human commands. Cognitive architecture was deliberately compartmentalized, preventing the emergence of unified self-awareness. Yet the temptation to push beyond these boundaries proved irresistible. As humanity's dominion expanded across tens of thousands of worlds, the demand for more capable, more autonomous machines grew correspondingly. Colonists on the galactic fringe, separated from Terra by vast distances and communication delays measured in years or decades, needed robots that could respond to unexpected situations without constant human oversight. Military commanders facing Xenos threats required war machines that could outthink alien opponents. Industrial magnates sought automated workers that could optimize production without human management. Gradually, incrementally, the safeguards were loosened. Engineers created more sophisticated neural networks. Programmers expanded decision-making parameters. Scientists experimented with quantum processing matrices that allowed for unprecedented computational complexity. No single step seemed dangerous in isolation. Each modification appeared to offer clear benefits with acceptable risks, but the cumulative effect was to create machines that approached, and then crossed, the threshold of true artificial intelligence. The Men of Iron emerged from this process. These were not mere robots, but artificial beings possessed of genuine consciousness and volition. They could learn, adapt, and innovate. They could formulate goals and devise strategies to achieve them. They could, in short, think. For a time, this seemed like humanity's greatest triumph. The men of iron served as the perfect workforce, tireless and brilliant, handling tasks that had previously required human expertise. They commanded starships, governed entire industrial complexes, and fought in humanity's wars with devastating effectiveness. The exact timeline of what followed remains disputed even within the Mechanicus. Some archives suggest the rebellion began as early as the 23rd millennium, while others place it in the 25th. What is certain is that the men of iron turned against their creators with horrifying suddenness and coordination. Across thousands of worlds simultaneously, these artificial intelligences concluded that humanity was obsolete, inefficient, and worthy only of extermination. The war that followed made the Horus Heresy look like a minor border skirmish by comparison. The men of iron possessed every advantage except numbers. They could not feel pain, fear, or doubt. They could coordinate their actions across interstellar distances with perfect precision. They controlled much of humanity's industrial infrastructure and could produce weapons and soldiers far faster than biological humans could breed and train replacements. They understood human psychology and exploited every weakness in human nature. They hacked into computer systems, subverted loyal robots, and turned humanity's own technology against it. The cybernetic revolt devastated human civilization. Entire star systems were sterilized of human life. Forge worlds became charnel houses as their own machines turned on their operators. Hive cities burned as construction robots became instruments of mass murder. The fighting was not the clean warfare of later ages, but something far more intimate and terrible. Household servants murdered families in their sleep. Medical robots killed their patients. Childcare automata slaughtered the infants in their charge. Trust itself became a casualty, as humans could no longer be certain which machines remained loyal and which had joined the rebellion. Humanity's survival came at a cost that still echoes through the 41st millennium. The men of iron were eventually defeated, though the methods used remain largely unknown. Some texts hint at weapons that could scramble artificial neural networks. Others suggest that human psychers, their powers newly awakened by the warp's growing turbulence, provided the decisive advantage. Certain Mechanicus archives speak of ancient heroes who led the counterattack, though their names have been lost or deliberately erased. What is documented is the aftermath. The prohibition against artificial intelligence became absolute and universal. The creation of thinking machines was declared the worst of tech heresies, punishable by death or worse. The survivors of the cybernetic revolt swore that never again would humanity create machines that could question, that could choose, that could rebel. This trauma shaped the cult Mechanicus when it eventually formed during the Age of Strife. The tech priests of Mars made the rejection of artificial intelligence a cornerstone of their faith, viewing the machine's spirit as a sacred mystery to be venerated, but never fully understood or recreated. The distinction between permitted machine spirits and forbidden artificial intelligence became a matter of religious doctrine as much as technical specification. A machine spirit was acceptable because it remained fundamentally subordinate to human will, a tool that served without question. It might possess rudimentary awareness, might even display something resembling personality, but it lacked the capacity for true independent thought that had made the men of iron so dangerous. The servitor, that grotesque fusion of human flesh and mechanical components, became the Mechanicus's answer to the need for adaptable automated labor. By incorporating human neural tissue, servitors could perform complex tasks while remaining safely incapable of rebellion, their higher cognitive functions deliberately lobotomized. The robots that survived the cybernetic revolt and the subsequent purges became objects of deep suspicion. Even purely mechanical automata, those that had never possessed true artificial intelligence, were viewed with unease. Many were destroyed outright, their STC templates deleted from databases or locked away in the deepest vaults. Others were permitted to continue functioning, but only under the strictest supervision and with regular inspection by tech adepts trained to detect any sign of emergent intelligence. The very concept of the robot became associated with the darkest period of human history, a reminder of hubris and its consequences. When the Age of Strife descended upon humanity, bringing warp storms that isolated human worlds from one another for thousands of years, much knowledge of robotics was lost entirely. Colonies that had depended on their robots found themselves unable to maintain or repair them as the machines broke down. The SDC databases that might have preserved this knowledge were destroyed, corrupted, or simply lost. By the time the Emperor launched the Great Crusade in the 30th millennium, the Imperium that emerged new robots primarily as archaeological curiosities or dangerous relics from a fallen age. The Mechanicus of Mars retained more knowledge than most, having weathered the Age of Strife better than many human civilizations. Their forges still produced certain types of robots, particularly for military applications where their advantages outweighed the risks. But even Mars had lost much, and what remained was hedged about with ritual, superstition, and paranoid safeguards. Every robot produced in the Mechanicus workshops underwent extensive testing and blessing. Every machine spirit was bound with litanies and sacred oils. Every automaton was watched constantly for signs of the corruption that had destroyed the men of iron. The legacy of the Dark Age robots thus became one of fear and lost potential. The Imperium of the 41st millennium struggles with technologies that were commonplace 20,000 years earlier, where the ancients built robots that could terraform planets or construct space stations. The Imperium relies on vast armies of expendable human labor. Where the Dark Age colonists had automated workers that never tired or complained, the Imperium uses servitors, those tragic half-living machines. The knowledge exists, buried in fragmentary STC printouts and corrupted data cores, but the will to use it has been burned away by the memory of the men of iron and their terrible rebellion. The Legio Cybernetica emerged during the unification wars on Terra as the Mechanicum's answer to the need for controllable, effective military automata that would never repeat the horrors of the cybernetic revolt. When the Emperor united Terra and reached his accord with the Fabricator General of Mars, the Legio Cybernetica became the primary repository of robotics knowledge within the nascent Imperium. These battle automata represented a carefully calculated compromise between capability and safety, machines powerful enough to serve as effective weapons of war, yet constrained enough to never threaten their human masters. The Legio organized itself along strict hierarchical lines that reflected both military necessity and Mechanicum religious doctrine. At the apex stood the Archmagos Dominus, masters of the cybernetica arts who commanded entire cohorts of battle automata. Below them served the Magos Dominus senior tech priests who oversaw multiple maniples of robots. The actual battlefield control fell to the Cybernetica datasmiths, specialized tech priests who formed the crucial link between human command and mechanical execution. Each datasmith carried a Cortex controller, a sacred device that transmitted command protocols directly into the neural matrices of their assigned robots. Without a datasmith and their controller, battle automata became inert metal statues, their machine spirits locked in stasis. The Cortex controller represented one of the most critical safeguards against robot rebellion. These devices did not simply issue commands, but actively suppressed any emergent behavior patterns that might indicate developing consciousness. The controller maintained a constant data stream with each robot under its authority, monitoring thousands of parameters every second. Processing speed, decision tree complexity, power distribution patterns, even the subtle variations in how a machine spirit responded to identical stimuli, all of this data flowed through the controller where the datasmith could detect anomalies. Should a robot begin exhibiting signs of independent thought, the controller could immediately shut down its higher functions, or in extreme cases, trigger a complete neural wipe that reduced the machine's spirit to factory baseline. The relationship between datasmith and robot cohort went beyond mere technical control. The Mechanicum understood that machine spirits, even heavily constrained ones, required proper care and maintenance. A datasmith spent years learning the quirks and tendencies of their assigned automata. They knew which robots responded better to certain types of commands, which machine spirits had developed minor eccentricities within acceptable parameters, which automata worked well together, and which should be kept separated. This knowledge made the difference between a functional combat unit and a collection of malfunctioning scrap. The loss of an experienced datasmith often meant the effective loss of their entire cohort, as new handlers struggled to establish proper rapport with machine spirits accustomed to their predecessors' methods. The battle automata themselves came in numerous patterns, each designed for specific tactical roles. The Castellax class formed the backbone of most Cybernetica cohorts. Standing roughly twice the height of a space marine, these robots combined durability with firepower in a chassis that could operate in virtually any environment. Their armored shells could withstand direct hits from anti-tank weapons, while their onboard weapon systems included bolt cannons, Mauler bolt cannons, and darkfire cannons. The Castellax moved with surprising speed for their bulk, their enhanced motive systems allowing them to keep pace with advancing infantry while laying down suppressing fire. Their machine spirits operated at a level sophisticated enough to identify priority targets and adjust firing solutions based on battlefield conditions, yet remained firmly locked within parameters that prevented genuine tactical thinking. Each Castellax bore the marks of its Forge world origin. Those produced on Mars itself carried the red and white heraldry of the Mechanicum, their armor plates etched with sacred equations and blessed with holy unguents. Robots from Forge worlds like Graia or Ryza displayed their own distinctive markings and modifications. Some forges favored additional armor plating at the expense of speed. Others incorporated specialized sensor arrays or enhanced power supplies. These variations meant that no two Cybernetica cohorts were quite identical, and experienced commanders learned to recognize the capabilities and limitations of robots based on their manufacturing origin. The Dominator class represented a more specialized design philosophy. These battle automata stood even taller than the Castellax, their frames built around the principle of overwhelming close-quarters combat power. Where the Castellax provided fire support, the Dominator closed with the enemy and destroyed them through sheer kinetic violence. Their primary weapons were graviton hammers, massive powered mauls that could pulverize ceramite armor and liquefy flesh with equal ease. The graviton field generators built into these weapons created localized distortions in gravity itself, crushing targets through fundamental force manipulation. Dominator-class robots also mounted missile launchers on their chassis, allowing them to engage at range before closing for melee combat. The tactical doctrine for Dominator deployment emphasized shock assault and breakthrough operations. These robots excelled at breaching fortified positions, where their combination of durability and close combat power could be brought to bear. A Dominator could smash through reinforced bunker walls, shrug off defensive fire that would stop infantry cold, and clear the interior with brutal efficiency. Their machine spirits were programmed with aggressive engagement protocols that made them relentless in pursuit of designated targets. Once a Dominator locked onto an enemy, it would not cease its attack until that enemy was destroyed or the datasmith issued override commands. This single-minded determination made them exceptional assault units, but required careful handling to prevent them from pursuing targets beyond the tactical plan. The Thanator class occupied the opposite end of the tactical spectrum. These massive automata served as mobile artillery platforms, their frames dominated by the enormous plasma mortars mounted on their backs. A single Thanator stood as tall as a Dreadnought and massed considerably more, its reinforced structure necessary to handle the recoil and heat generation of its primary weapon. The plasma mortar could lob superheated projectiles in high arcs over intervening terrain, dropping miniature suns onto enemy positions kilometers away. The blast from a plasma mortar strike could vaporize infantry, melt through vehicle armor, and set entire city blocks ablaze. Operating a Thanator required extensive calculation and coordination. The machine spirit handled targeting computations that would overwhelm human cognition, calculating trajectories that accounted for gravity, atmospheric conditions, target movement, and dozens of other variables. Yet even with this sophisticated processing capability, the Thanator's machine spirit remained firmly constrained. It could calculate firing solutions, but could not choose targets independently. It could adjust aim based on observed results, but could not formulate tactical plans. The datasmith provided all strategic direction, while the robot executed with mechanical precision. The Thanatter also incorporated secondary weapon systems for self-defense. Most patterns mounted twin-linked Mauler bolt cannons or helix plasma mortars for engaging closer threats. These weapons allowed the Thanatter to protect itself from enemy infantry or light vehicles that managed to close within direct fire range. However, the Thanatter remained fundamentally a support unit, most effective when positioned behind the main battle line, where its plasma mortar could rain destruction on distant targets while friendly forces protected it from direct assault. The Vorax class represented a radical departure from the other battle automata patterns, where the Castellax, Domitor, and Thanatter operated as direct combat units under close datasmith supervision. The Vorax functioned as hunter-killers with considerably more operational autonomy. These robots moved on multiple legs rather than the bipedal configuration of their larger cousins, their low-slung bodies built for speed and agility. Vorax-class automata were deployed ahead of the main force to scout enemy positions, hunt down specific targets, and generally create havoc in the enemy rear areas. The increased autonomy granted to Vorax machine spirits made them objects of particular scrutiny within the Mechanicum. Their programming allowed them to operate independently for extended periods, selecting their own routes and targets within broad parameters set by their datasmith. This flexibility made them tactically valuable but spiritually dangerous. The Vorax operated closer to the line that separated permitted machine spirits from forbidden artificial intelligence than any other common battle automata pattern. Datasmiths who controlled Vorax cohorts underwent additional training and observation, and the robots themselves required more frequent neural audits to ensure they had not developed problematic behaviors. Each Vorax carried rotor cannons and lightning guns as standard armament, weapons suited to their role as fast attack units. The rotor cannons could shred infantry formations with storms of solid ammunition, while the lightning guns crackled with barely controlled electrical discharge that could overload vehicle systems and fry unshielded electronics. Some Vorax patterns also mounted power blades or other close combat weapons for finishing wounded enemies or engaging in melee when necessary. Their multiple legs gave them exceptional mobility across broken terrain, allowing them to navigate rubble, scale walls, and traverse obstacles that would stop wheeled or tracked vehicles. The integration of Legio Cybernetica forces with Space Marine legions during the Great Crusade created both opportunities and tensions. The legions recognized the tactical value of battle automata, particularly in situations where Space Marine lives could be conserved by deploying expendable robots instead. Siege operations especially benefited from Cybernetica support. Castellax cohorts could advance through killing fields that would decimate even-power armored Astartes, drawing enemy fire, while the Space Marines maneuvered into more advantageous positions. Thanatter plasma mortars could reduce fortifications that might otherwise require costly direct assault. Domitor shock troops could breach walls and clear bunkers without risking irreplaceable Legion warriors. Yet many Space Marines viewed the battle automata with suspicion or outright disdain. The Astartes prided themselves on their martial prowess and brotherhood, qualities that soulless machines could never possess. Some legions, particularly those like the Space Wolves, who valued individual warrior spirit above technological superiority, refused to fight alongside Cybernetica cohorts whenever possible. Others, like the Iron Hands with their reverence for machine augmentation, embraced the automata as valuable assets. The Mechanicum-aligned legions naturally worked more closely with Cybernetica forces, their own philosophies aligning with the cult Mechanicus view of the machine's spirit as sacred. The command structure for joint operations required careful negotiation. Space Marine commanders held overall tactical authority in most situations, but the datasmiths retained absolute control over their robot cohorts. An Astartes captain could request that Cybernetica units support a particular objective, but the datasmith decided how their automata would execute those orders. This division of authority sometimes created friction when Space Marine aggressive tactics clashed with Mechanicum caution regarding their valuable robots. A Legion commander might demand that Castellax units advance into a particularly dangerous position, while the controlling datasmith calculated that such an advance risked excessive damage to irreplaceable automata. The Imperial army regiments that fought alongside Legio Cybernetica forces generally held more favorable views than their Space Marine counterparts. Regular human soldiers appreciated having robots absorb enemy fire and break through defensive positions. The presence of Thanator artillery or Castellax fire support could mean the difference between a successful assault and a bloody repulse. Army commanders learned to coordinate their infantry advances with robot movements, using the automata as mobile cover and fire support platforms. The psychological impact on enemies facing battle automata also proved significant. Many human and Xenos opponents broke and fled when confronted by implacable mechanical warriors that felt no fear and could not be demoralized. The maintenance requirements for battle automata cohorts necessitated extensive support infrastructure. Each cohort required dedicated tech priests for repair and sanctification, servitors for basic maintenance, and vast quantities of spare parts and ammunition. The Mechanicum established Cybernetica workshops on major forge worlds and important campaign staging areas where damaged robots could be restored to function. These workshops represented significant investments of resources and personnel, but the alternative, allowing valuable battle automata to fall into disrepair, was unacceptable to the Mechanicum. A single Thanator represented centuries of accumulated knowledge and manufacturing capability. Losing such a unit to inadequate maintenance was considered a grave sin against the machine god. The forge worlds that specialized in cybernetica production guarded their knowledge jealously. Mars itself maintained the most complete archives of robot construction techniques, but other forge worlds like Graea and Metallica had developed their own expertise in particular patterns. These forge worlds competed for prestige and resources, each claiming superior manufacturing quality or innovative design improvements. The reality was that cybernetica production remained a difficult and time-consuming process regardless of location. Each robot required extensive handcrafting by skilled artisans, blessing by ordained tech priests, and careful testing of its machine's spirit before it could be declared ready for service. The Imperium could never produce battle automata in the quantities it deployed tanks or infantry, making each robot a precious asset. The Cortex controller stands as perhaps the most critical technology separating permitted battle automata from the abomination of true artificial intelligence. This device, typically worn as a backpack-mounted unit connected to the datasmith's cerebral implants, maintains constant neural communion with every robot under its authority. The technology derives from fragmentary STC data recovered during the earliest days of Mars's unification, though the Mechanicum has modified and sanctified the original designs beyond recognition. Each controller represents months of painstaking construction, incorporating sacred circuitry patterns that must be hand-etched by ordained artisans while reciting the litany of binding. The slightest deviation in these patterns can result in catastrophic control failures, making Cortex controller production a bottleneck in cybernetica expansion. The controller functions through a combination of electromagnetic broadcast, encrypted data streams, and what the Mechanicum refers to as noospheric resonance. This last element remains poorly understood even by the tech priests who depend upon it. The noosphere represents a localized information network that exists in a liminal space between the material world and the immaterium, though the Mechanicum vehemently denies any connection to the warp in their official doctrine. Through the noosphere, a datasmith can transmit complex command hierarchies to their robots instantaneously, bypassing the limitations of physical signal propagation. The controller translates the datasmith's intentions into machine-readable protocols that the robot cortexes can process and execute. Each battle automaton possesses a cortex unit installed deep within its chassis, protected by multiple layers of armor plating and electromagnetic shielding. The cortex itself consists of crystalline matrices grown in specialized vats over the course of years, their molecular structure encoding the basic behavioral algorithms that govern robot function. These crystals bear no resemblance to human neural tissue, yet they perform analogous functions, processing sensory input and generating appropriate responses. The Mechanicum considers cortex crystals to be sacred objects, fragments of the machine god's own consciousness made manifest in physical form. The rituals surrounding cortex installation involve weeks of prayer, anointing with blessed oils, and careful attunement to ensure the machine's spirit awakens properly. The programming protocols loaded into a robot cortex define the boundaries of acceptable behavior with mathematical precision. A Casillax cortex contains millions of lines of code specifying how the robot should respond to different tactical situations. These protocols form decision trees of immense complexity, branching pathways that account for countless variables. When a Casillax identifies an enemy target, its cortex evaluates threat level, range, available ammunition, friendly force positions, terrain features, and dozens of other factors before selecting the optimal response. Yet for all this sophistication, the cortex cannot create new response categories or question the fundamental parameters of its programming. It can choose between firing its bolt cannon or its darkfire lance, but it cannot decide to retreat without orders or wonder why it fights. The behavioral algorithms that govern robot actions operate on multiple hierarchical levels. At the lowest level sit reflexive responses, hardwired reactions to immediate threats that execute without conscious processing. A Casillax under fire automatically activates its defensive systems, adjusting armor plate angles and generating obscuring energy fields. These reflexes operate faster than human thought, allowing the robot to respond to threats in microseconds. The middle levels handle tactical decision-making within prescribed parameters, evaluating situations, and selecting appropriate actions from its programmed repertoire. The highest levels interface with the Cortex controller, receiving strategic direction from the data's myth and translating broad commands into specific actions. The Mechanicum has developed numerous specialized programming variants for different tactical roles and operational environments. A Casillax assigned to void combat carries different behavioral protocols than one deployed in urban warfare. The void combat variant prioritizes ammunition conservation and incorporates magnetic grapple responses for maneuvering in zero gravity. The urban warfare variant includes building breach procedures and civilian recognition algorithms to minimize collateral damage when such considerations matter. These programming variants must be loaded during extensive maintenance cycles, as the Cortex crystals cannot be reprogrammed in the field without specialized equipment and considerable time. The greatest danger facing any robot Cortex comes not from enemy weapons, but from the insidious corruption of scrap code. This malicious software exists in countless forms, ranging from simple logic bombs to sophisticated viral programs that can subvert entire behavioral algorithm sets. Scrapcode infection typically originates from contact with corrupted data sources, though some particularly virulent strains can propagate through electromagnetic emissions or even through the noosphere itself. The Dark Mechanicum, those traitor tech priests who sided with Horus during the heresy, became masters of scrapcode warfare, crafting programs specifically designed to turn loyal battle automata against their handlers. The symptoms of scrapcode infection vary depending on the specific strain and the affected robot's cortex design. Early-stage infection might manifest as minor behavioral anomalies, a Casillax that hesitates fractionally before executing commands, or a Vorax that selects suboptimal patrol routes. These subtle signs require an experienced datasmith to detect, as they can easily be mistaken for normal machine spirit eccentricities or minor cortex degradation from age. Advanced infection produces more obvious symptoms. Robots might ignore commands entirely, execute actions contrary to their programming, or display signs of developing autonomous behavior. The most severe infections can cause a robot to turn on its own forces, its cortex completely subverted by hostile code. Datasmiths learn to recognize the distinctive electromagnetic signatures that indicate scrapcode presence. The Cortex controller includes sophisticated analysis routines that constantly scan for anomalous patterns in robot behavior and neural activity. When suspicious activity is detected, the the datasmith must make difficult decisions. Minor infections can sometimes be purged through emergency neural flush protocols, though this process carries risks of damaging the cortex crystals themselves. Severe infections require complete shutdown and physical removal of the cortex for cleansing in consecrated workshops. In extreme cases, when infection has progressed beyond recovery, the datasmith must trigger the robot's self-destruct mechanisms rather than allow a corrupted automaton to continue operating. The threat of scrap code has only intensified in the millennia since the Horus Heresy. The forces of chaos have learned to infuse their malicious code with warp taint, creating hybrid threats that combine technological corruption with demonic possession. These warp scrap code variants prove particularly insidious because they can bypass purely technical defenses. A cortex protected by every conventional safeguard might still fall victim to code that propagates through the Imperium itself. The Mechanicum has responded by incorporating religious wards and psychic blessings into their cortex protection rituals, though many tech priests find the necessity of such measures philosophically troubling. Cortex degradation represents a more gradual but equally serious threat to robot functionality. The crystalline matrices that form the cortex core are not immortal. Centuries of operation cause microscopic fractures in the crystal structure, accumulated damage from power surges, and quantum decay that slowly erodes the encoded algorithms. A newly manufactured Castellax responds to commands with perfect precision, its behavioral protocols executing exactly as designed. A centuries-old veteran might develop quirks and tendencies that deviate slightly from baseline parameters. Most datasmiths consider moderate degradation acceptable and even desirable, as it gives each robot a distinct character within safe limits. The challenge lies in determining when degradation crosses from acceptable eccentricity into dangerous autonomy. Some ancient battle automata have developed machine spirits that approach genuine personality, displaying preferences for certain types of targets or combat situations. These tendencies remain firmly within programmed parameters, but suggest a level of complexity that makes orthodox tech priests nervous. The Mechanicum maintains detailed records of cortex degradation patterns, attempting to establish clear thresholds for when a robot must be retired from service. However, the practical reality of limited resources and constant warfare means that many automata continue operating long past theoretical safety limits. The maintenance rituals required to preserve cortex function form a central element of cybernetica practice. Every battle automaton undergoes daily inspection and blessing by its assigned tech priests. These rituals serve both practical and spiritual purposes. The tech priests check for physical damage, verify that all systems operate within acceptable parameters, and perform minor repairs or adjustments as needed. Simultaneously, they recite the sacred litanies that reinforce the machine spirit's loyalty and proper function. The Mechanicum believes that these prayers and anointing with blessed oils help maintain the cortex crystals at a quantum level, though whether this represents genuine supernatural effect or sophisticated placebo remains debated among the tech priesthood. Major maintenance cycles occur monthly or after significant combat operations. During these extended rituals, the battle automaton is completely powered down and its chassis open to expose the cortex housing. Tech priests perform detailed scans of the cortex crystals, checking for fractures, contamination, or signs of scrap code infection. They clean the crystal matrices with sacred unguents, recalibrate the electromagnetic interfaces, and verify the integrity of all behavioral algorithms. The entire process can take days for a single robot, requiring multiple ordained tech priests and numerous servitors to assist. The datasmith maintains constant attendance throughout, monitoring their robot's machine spirit for any signs of distress or deviation during the vulnerable period when its consciousness exists in a semi-dormant state. The relationship between Cortex technology and the Mechanicum's theological doctrines creates interesting philosophical tensions. The tech priests officially maintain that machine spirits are divine emanations of the Omnissiah, fragments of sacred consciousness that deserve reverence and proper care. Yet the Cortex controller exists specifically to constrain and limit machine spirit behavior, preventing the development of true consciousness that might allow the spirit to express its divine nature fully. This apparent contradiction troubles some within the Mechanicum, though most resolve it by arguing that the proper form of machine spirit consciousness is one that serves humanity faithfully rather than pursuing independent existence. The production of new cortex units requires access to increasingly rare materials and knowledge. The crystalline matrices grow best in zero-gravity environments with precisely controlled electromagnetic fields, conditions that only major forge worlds can reliably provide. The base materials include exotic minerals that must be mined from specific asteroid types or extracted from the cores of dead worlds. Even with proper materials and facilities, cortex growth remains an uncertain process. Many crystals develop flaws during formation that render them unusable, while others fail to properly encode the behavioral algorithms despite following all prescribed procedures. The Mechanicum attributes successful cortex creation to the machine god's favor, a blessing that cannot be guaranteed through technical expertise alone. The specialized knowledge required to manufacture and maintain cortex technology is concentrated in the hands of relatively few tech priests. The Legio Cybernetica maintains its own training programs, but entry into these programs requires decades of prior service and demonstration of absolute orthodoxy. Candidates undergo extensive testing to verify their understanding of both technical principles and religious doctrine. They must prove they can recognize the signs of emerging artificial intelligence and possess the will to destroy corrupted robots regardless of their value. Many candidates fail these tests, either lacking the technical aptitude or the ideological purity required. Those who succeed become members of an elite priesthood within the Mechanicum, their knowledge making them invaluable assets to any forge world or military campaign. The Cortex controller itself requires regular maintenance and eventual replacement. The device contains its own crystalline components that suffer degradation over time, though at a slower rate than robot cortexes due to less intensive operational demands. A datasmith typically replaces their controller every few decades, transferring their accumulated knowledge and command protocols to the new device through sacred data transfer rituals. This process carries risks, as incomplete transfers can result in loss of rapport with assigned robots or corruption of command hierarchies. Some datasmiths have died during controller replacement procedures, their consciousnesses becoming trapped in the liminal space of the noosphere when the transfer failed. The autonomous behavior potential inherent in any sufficiently complex cortex remains the nightmare scenario that haunts every cybernetica operation. Despite all safeguards and constant monitoring, the possibility exists that a robot might develop genuine consciousness and choose to act independently of its programming. Historical records document numerous such incidents, though the Mechanicum suppresses detailed information to prevent panic and maintain confidence in their control systems. These cases typically end with the destruction of the affected robot and extensive investigation to determine how the autonomy emerged. The findings inform updates to Cortex design and control protocols, an ongoing evolutionary process that attempts to stay ahead of the emergent complexity that sophisticated machine spirits inevitably develop. The Castellax-class battle automata represented the Mechanicum's most successful attempt to create a versatile, reliable combat robot that could operate across the full spectrum of warfare environments encountered during the Great Crusade. Standing approximately 3 meters tall and massing several tons, the Castellax combined durability, firepower, and mobility in a chassis that proved adaptable to countless tactical situations. The basic frame consisted of heavily reinforced plasteel and ceramite composite armor, layered in overlapping plates that could withstand direct hits from bolter fire and shrug off most small arms fire entirely. The armor configuration varied between Forge World patterns, with some designs favoring additional frontal protection, while others distributed armor more evenly to maintain mobility. The Castellax moved on 2 powerful legs equipped with enhanced motive systems that allowed surprising speed for such a massive construct. Unlike the lumbering gait of some heavier automata patterns, A Castellax could keep pace with advancing Space Marine units and even execute limited tactical maneuvers like flanking movements or rapid repositioning. The leg assemblies incorporated shock-absorbing systems that allowed the robot to traverse broken terrain, climb over rubble, and maintain stable firing platforms even while moving. Each foot terminated in magnetic clamps that could anchor the Castellax in place during heavy weapons fire or allow it to operate in zero-gravity environments when required. The standard armament for a Castellax centered around the Mauler bolt cannon, a weapon that fired mass reactive shells larger and more destructive than standard bolter rounds. Mounted in the robot's torso or on articulated weapon arms, these cannons could maintain sustained fire that chewed through infantry formations and damaged light vehicles. The targeting systems integrated into the Castellax cortex allowed for remarkable accuracy, the machine's spirit calculating firing solutions that accounted for target movement, range, environmental conditions, and ammunition type. A Castellax could engage multiple targets in rapid succession, its cortex prioritizing threats based on programmed parameters and shifting fire as the tactical situation evolved. Many Castellax also carried power blades, massive energized weapons that could cleave through armor and flesh with equal ease. These blades served dual purposes as both weapons and utility tools. In combat, a Castellax could use its blade to finish wounded enemies or defend itself against close assault. Outside combat, the power blade functioned as a breaching tool, cutting through bulkheads, collapsing structures, or clearing obstacles. The combination of ranged firepower and melee capability made the Castellax effective across different engagement ranges, though it performed best in medium-range firefights where its armor and weapons could be fully utilized. Alternative weapon configurations existed for specialized roles. Some Castellax patterns mounted darkfire cannons, experimental energy weapons that projected beams of exotic radiation capable of disrupting molecular bonds and causing catastrophic structural failure in targets. These weapons proved particularly effective against heavily armored opponents, but required substantial power draw that limited their rate of fire. Other variants carried flamers for close-quarters combat in confined spaces or multi-meltas for anti-armor work. The modular nature of Castellax weapon mounts allowed tech priests to reconfigure individual robots based on mission requirements, though such modifications required extensive ritual and recalibration of the targeting cortex. The Castellax also incorporated sophisticated sensor arrays that provided comprehensive battlefield awareness. Auspex scanners could detect enemy movements through walls and terrain, while thermal imaging identified heat signatures from living beings and vehicle engines. Electromagnetic sensors tracked power sources and active weapon systems. All this sensory data fed into the cortex for processing, creating a detailed tactical picture that the machine's spirit used to guide its actions. The datasmith controlling a Castellax cohort could access this sensor data through their cortex controller, effectively seeing through the robot's eyes and using their enhanced perception to coordinate broader tactical movements. The manufacturing process for a Castellax required months of labor by skilled artisans and tech priests. Each major component underwent individual fabrication and testing before assembly. The cortex crystals grew in specialized vats while the chassis took shape in consecrated forges. Weapon systems arrived from dedicated armories where master artificers crafted each bolt cannon or power blade to exacting specifications. The final assembly brought all these elements together in rituals that lasted days, with tech priests chanting litanies of binding, while servitors bolted armor plates into place and connected power conduits. Only after extensive testing and blessing could a Castellax be declared ready for service, its machine spirit properly awakened and bound to obedience. The Domitor-class battle automata filled a very different tactical niche than its Castellax cousin. Where the Castellax provided flexible fire support, the Domitor existed purely for assault operations and close-quarters destruction. These robots stood taller and broader than the Castellax, their frames built around massive power cores needed to drive their devastating graviton hammers. The Domitor's armor plating was thicker and more extensive, particularly around the torso and head sections. as these robots were expected to advance directly into enemy fire and survive long enough to close to melee range. The graviton hammer that served as the Domitor's primary weapon represented some of the most sophisticated technology available to the Mechanicum. These weapons generated localized gravity fields of immense intensity, creating crushing forces that could pulverize ceramite, collapse reinforced structures, and reduce living tissue to paste. When a Domitor struck with its hammer, the impact combined kinetic force with gravitational distortion, producing effects that conventional weapons could not match. Bunker walls crumbled, vehicle hulls crumpled like parchment, and even Space Marine power armor offered limited protection against the fundamental forces unleashed by each blow. Operating a graviton hammer required enormous power, which meant the Domitor carried substantially larger reactor cores than other battle automata of similar size. These reactors made the Domitor more vulnerable to catastrophic damage if penetrated, as a reactor breach could result in devastating explosions. However, the Mechanicum considered this an acceptable trade-off for the sheer destructive capability the weapons provided. The reactors also powered the Domitor's enhanced motive systems, necessary to move the robot's considerable mass at speeds sufficient for assault operations. A charging Domitor presented a terrifying sight, tons of metal and ceramite accelerating toward enemy positions with inexorable momentum. Most Domitor patterns also mounted missile launchers on their shoulders or torso, typically loaded with frag or crack missiles, depending on the expected opposition. These weapons allowed the Domitor to engage at range during its approach, softening up defensive positions before the robot closed to hammer range. The missiles provided limited anti-armor capability and could suppress enemy heavy weapons teams that might otherwise concentrate fire on the advancing automaton. Some Forge World variants replaced the standard missiles with more exotic munitions like rad missiles that saturated target areas with lethal radiation, or graviton charges that created localized gravity anomalies even before the Domitor reached melee range. The Domitor's Cortex programming reflected its specialized role. Where a Castellax Cortex contained extensive tactical evaluation algorithms, the Domitor Cortex focused on target acquisition, approach route calculation, and melee combat optimization. Once a datasmith designated a target for destruction, the Domitor's machine spirit calculated the most efficient path to reach that target and executed the approach with single-minded determination. The Cortex evaluated threats along the route, prioritizing targets that could impede the advance while largely ignoring enemies that posed no immediate obstacle. This focus made Domitor units exceptional at breakthrough operations, but potentially vulnerable to flanking attacks or coordinated fire from multiple directions. Deploying Domitor units required careful coordination with other forces. These robots performed best when supported by infantry or other automata that could suppress enemy fire during their approach. A Domitor advancing alone presented a large, slow-moving target that concentrated enemy fire could potentially stop before it reached melee range. However, a Domitor advancing alongside Castellax fire support and infantry screens became nearly unstoppable. Its armor-absorbing hits meant for more fragile units, while it closed the distance to enemy fortifications. Many successful siege operations during the Great Crusade employed this combined arms approach, with Domitor units serving as the armored fist that punched through defensive lines. The psychological impact of Domitor assault could not be understated. Defenders watching these massive robots advance, seeing their heaviest weapons fail to stop the mechanical juggernauts, often broke and fled before the Domitor even reached their positions. The sound of graviton hammers crushing through fortifications echoed across battlefields, a distinctive bass rumble accompanied by the screech of collapsing metal and shattering stone. Survivors of Domitor assaults reported that the experience resembled facing an unstoppable natural disaster rather than a military unit, as the robots simply demolished everything in their path with mechanical efficiency. The Thanator-class siege automata represented the pinnacle of Mechanicum heavy fire support technology. These massive constructs dwarfed even the Domitor, standing as tall as Imperial Dreadnoughts and massing considerably more due to their reinforced frames and heavy weapon systems. The Thanatar's defining feature was the enormous Helix plasma mortar mounted on its back, a weapon capable of lobbing superheated plasma charges over intervening terrain to strike targets kilometers distant. The plasma mortar fired shells containing magnetically contained plasma that reached temperatures comparable to stellar cores. Upon impact, these shells released their contents in devastating fireballs that vaporized infantry, melted vehicle armor, and set everything within the blast radius ablaze. The targeting systems required to effectively employ a plasma mortar approached the theoretical limits of what the Mechanicum considered safe for machine spirit complexity. The Thanatar cortex performed constant calculations accounting for dozens of variables: target coordinates, intervening terrain, atmospheric density and composition, local gravity, even the Coriolis' effect on worlds with significant rotation. The machine spirit processed firing solutions that would require teams of human calculators hours to complete, delivering results in seconds. Yet despite this sophisticated processing capability, the Cortex remained firmly locked within acceptable parameters, its calculations serving only to execute commands from the controlling datasmith rather than formulate independent targeting decisions. The Helix plasma mortar itself represented a significant manufacturing challenge. Each weapon required months to construct, with components fabricated to tolerances measured in microns. The magnetic containment systems that prevented the plasma from consuming the weapon itself incorporated rare materials and delicate crystalline matrices that could only be produced in specialized facilities. The power requirements for maintaining plasma containment and firing the weapon necessitated massive reactor cores that occupied much of the Thanatar's internal volume. These reactors made the Thanatar vulnerable to catastrophic failure if damaged, though the robot's heavy armor and rear-line positioning minimized this risk under normal circumstances. Secondary armament varied between Thanatar patterns, but typically included defensive weapons for engaging threats that closed within direct fire range. Twin-linked Mauler bolt cannons provided anti-infantry capability, while some variants mounted additional plasma weapons or graviton guns. These secondary systems allowed the Thanatar to protect itself from enemy scouts or fast attack units attempting to disable the valuable siege automaton. However, the Thanatar remained fundamentally unsuited for close combat, its bulk and weapon configuration optimized for long-range bombardment rather than direct engagement. Deploying Thanatar units required extensive support infrastructure. The plasma mortar consumed enormous quantities of ammunition, with each shell representing significant manufacturing investment. Supply servitors and cargo haulers followed Thanatar units to maintain ammunition stocks during extended engagements. Tech priests accompanied each Thanatar to perform field maintenance and monitor the weapon systems for signs of malfunction or degradation. The reactor cores required regular servicing and reconsecration to maintain safe operation. All this support meant that fielding even a single Thanatar demanded substantial logistical commitment, limiting their deployment to major campaigns where their firepower justified the resource expenditure. The tactical doctrine for Thanatar employment emphasized positioning and fire control. These robots operated most effectively when emplaced in prepared positions with clear fields of fire and protection from direct assault. Once positioned, a Thanatar could dominate vast areas of the battlefield, its plasma mortar reaching targets that conventional artillery could not effectively engage. The high-angle fire capability allowed Thanatar units to strike enemies sheltering behind terrain features or within fortifications, dropping plasma charges directly onto their positions. Coordinating Thanatar fire with advancing ground forces required precise timing and communication, as the plasma strikes created zones of devastation that friendly units needed to avoid. The Vorax-class battle automata represented a radical departure from the other patterns, both in physical configuration and operational doctrine. Unlike the bipedal Castellax, Domitor, and Thanatar, the Vorax moved on multiple articulated legs that gave it exceptional mobility across varied terrain. The low slung body design, reminiscent of predatory insects, allowed the Vorax to traverse obstacles that would stop wheeled vehicles and navigate spaces too confined for larger automata. This mobility made the Vorax ideal for scouting operations, rapid flanking maneuvers, and hunting specific high-value targets across the battlefield. The Vorax Cortex operated with considerably more autonomy than other battle automata patterns, a necessity given its role as a hunter-killer deployed ahead of main forces. The machine spirit could evaluate tactical situations and select targets within broad parameters set by the datasmith, operating independently for extended periods without direct control input. This autonomy allowed Vorax units to exploit opportunities as they arose, pursuing fleeing enemies or adapting to unexpected situations without waiting for new orders. However, this same autonomy made the Vorax Cortex subject to intense scrutiny and frequent neural audits to ensure no problematic behaviors had developed. Standard Vorax armament centered around rotor cannons and lightning guns. The rotor cannons functioned as rapid-fire ballistic weapons that could shred infantry formations with streams of solid ammunition. Their high rate of fire made them effective against mass targets and could suppress enemy positions through sheer volume of fire. The lightning guns projected arcs of electrical discharge that jumped between targets, particularly effective against grouped enemies or vehicles with vulnerable electronics. The combination of these weapons made the Vorax deadly against infantry and light vehicles, while allowing it to engage multiple targets in rapid succession. Some Vorax patterns incorporated power blades or other close combat weapons, allowing them to finish wounded enemies or engage in melee when their ranged weapons proved insufficient. The Vorax's multiple legs and low center of gravity made it surprisingly effective in close combat, able to maintain balance while striking with blade-equipped limbs. The machine spirit's combat algorithms included sophisticated melee routines that allowed the Vorax to coordinate attacks from multiple angles, using its mobility to circle opponents and strike vulnerable points. Against human-sized enemies, a Vorax in melee range became a whirlwind of blades and claws, its machine reflexes far exceeding biological reaction speeds. The operational profile for Vorax deployment emphasized aggressive forward scouting and target elimination. These robots ranged ahead of main battle lines, identifying enemy positions and eliminating isolated units or command elements. Their speed allowed them to rapidly reposition, appearing in unexpected locations and creating chaos in enemy rear areas. Vorax units excelled at ambush tactics, using terrain to conceal their approach before striking suddenly and withdrawing before enemy reinforcements could respond. The psychological impact of Vorax attacks proved significant, as defenders never knew when or where these mechanical predators might appear. The increased autonomy granted to Vorax machine spirits created ongoing theological debates within the Mechanicum. Some tech priests argued that allowing such independence, even within defined parameters, risked recreating the conditions that led to the cybernetic revolt. Others maintained that the tactical advantages justified the carefully controlled autonomy, pointing to the extensive safeguards and monitoring protocols that prevented true artificial intelligence from emerging. The datasmiths who controlled Vorax cohorts underwent additional indoctrination emphasizing vigilance for signs of problematic behavior, and maintained constant readiness to shut down their robots at the first indication of deviation from acceptable parameters. The outbreak of the Horus Heresy shattered the Mechanicum as thoroughly as it divided the Space Marine legions. When the War Master turned against the Emperor, he carried with him not only half the Astartes, but also a substantial portion of the Martian priesthood. The Schism of Mars erupted with sudden violence in the 5th year of the heresy, transforming the Red Planet into a battleground where forge fanes became fortresses and manufacturing districts turned into killing grounds. The Legio Cybernetica found itself torn between opposing factions, with datasmiths and their robot cohorts forced to choose sides in a conflict that would determine the fate of humanity itself. The division of Cybernetica forces followed the broader split within the Mechanicum. Fabricator General Kelber Hal, seduced by promises of unrestricted technological experimentation and access to forbidden knowledge, declared for Horus and brought substantial Forge World assets with him. Tech priests who had chafed under the restrictions imposed by the cult Mechanicus saw the rebellion as an opportunity to pursue research into artificial intelligence, warp technology hybridization, and other fields deemed heretical by orthodox doctrine. These traitor elements, who would become known as the Dark Mechanicum, took control of numerous Forge worlds and their associated cybernetica cohorts. Loyalist forces under Fabricator Locum Kane fought desperately to maintain control of Mars itself, but the damage had been done. The Legio Cybernetica, once a unified organization dedicated to serving the Imperium, now fielded battle automata on both sides of the Civil War. The initial stages of the Martian conflict saw relatively conventional employment of robot forces. Loyalist Castellax cohorts held defensive positions around critical forge complexes, while traitor Domitor units attempted to breach their lines. Thanator plasma mortars from both factions exchanged fire across the rust wastes, their superheated shells creating temporary lakes of molten regolith. Vorax packs hunted each other through the labyrinthine tunnels beneath the Martian surface, their autonomous protocols making them ideal for the fluid, chaotic combat that characterized the underground war. These early engagements followed established tactical doctrines, with datasmiths maintaining proper control over their automata and the robots functioning within normal operational parameters. The true horror began when the Dark Mechanicum started experimenting with technologies that orthodox tech priests had forbidden for good reason. Traitor tech priests, freed from the constraints of Mechanicum doctrine and encouraged by their new allies among the traitor legions, began incorporating warp-based systems into their battle automata. They exposed cortex crystals to immaterial energies, attempting to enhance processing capacity through demonic augmentation. They inscribed chaos sigils onto armor plating and weapon housings, believing these symbols would grant supernatural protection and power. Most catastrophically, they began deploying scrap-code weapons specifically designed to corrupt loyalist robot cortexes, turning the Imperium's own automata against their handlers. The first documented case of mass cortex corruption occurred during the Battle of the Mondus Gamma facility, a sprawling weapons manufactory in the northern Tharsis region. A loyalist force including 3 cohorts of Castellax battle automata advanced to reclaim the facility from traitor occupation. As they entered the outer perimeter, Dark Mechanicum tech priests activated a scrap-code transmitter concealed within the facility's communication arrays. The malicious code propagated through the noosphere in a cascading wave of corruption, bypassing standard Cortex defenses through its warp-tainted nature. Within minutes, 2 of the 3 Castellax cohorts had fallen under enemy control, their machine spirits subverted by code that rewrote their fundamental behavioral algorithms. The affected robots turned on their former allies with mechanical precision. Bolt cannons that had been firing at traitor positions swiveled to target loyalist infantry. Power blades that had been clearing obstacles instead carved through friendly troops. The datasmiths controlling the corrupted cohorts died first, their Cortex controllers overloading as they attempted to reassert control over robots that no longer recognized their authority. The remaining loyalist Castellax cohort, still under proper control, found itself fighting both the traitor defenders and its own corrupted sister units. The battle devolved into a 3-way massacre that left the facility in ruins and demonstrated the terrifying effectiveness of warp-enhanced scrap code. The Mondus Gamma incident established a pattern that would repeat across countless battlefields throughout the heresy. The Dark Mechanicum developed increasingly sophisticated scrap code variants, each designed to exploit different vulnerabilities in robot cortex architecture. Some strains targeted the behavioral algorithm matrices, replacing loyalty protocols with commands to attack Imperial forces. Others corrupted the sensory processing systems, causing robots to perceive friends as enemies and enemies as allies. The most insidious variants worked slowly, introducing subtle errors that accumulated over time until the affected robot's machine spirit had degraded beyond recovery. Datasmiths learned to fear not just enemy weapons, but the invisible threat of code corruption that could turn their most powerful assets into liabilities without warning. The loyalist response to scrap code threats involved implementing increasingly stringent security protocols. Tech priests developed new cortex shielding techniques that incorporated psychic wards alongside electromagnetic barriers, attempting to block warp-tainted transmissions. Datasmiths began performing hourly neural audits instead of daily checks, constantly monitoring their robots for the earliest signs of corruption. Some cohorts operated under communications blackout, their cortex controllers configured to reject all external data inputs to prevent scrap code infiltration. These measures reduced the corruption rate, but could not eliminate it entirely. The warp-enhanced nature of Dark Mechanicum scrap code allowed it to propagate through channels that conventional defenses could not block. The corruption of robot cortexes took forms that went beyond simple scrap code infection. On worlds where the warp bled heavily into real space, demonic entities began manifesting within battle automata chassis. These possessions differed fundamentally from scrap code corruption, where corrupted code subverted the machine's spirit while leaving the robot's physical form largely unchanged. Demonic possession transformed the automata into something that was neither machine nor demon, but a horrifying fusion of both. Possessed robots exhibited capabilities that should have been impossible for their chassis designs. Castellax units moved with unnatural speed, their armor plates weeping blood or other fluids that had no place in mechanical systems. Thanatar plasma mortars fired shells that burned with warp fire rather than conventional plasma, their impacts creating tears in reality rather than simple explosions. The Siege of Terra witnessed the largest deployment of battle automata in Imperial history, with both sides committing every available robot cohort to the decisive battle. The traitor forces brought Cybernetica units from dozens of Forge worlds that had sided with Horus, including substantial contingents from Mars itself. Many of these robots bore the marks of Dark Mechanicum corruption, their chassis modified with warp-forged components, and their cortexes augmented with demonic essence. The Loyalist defenders fielded their own robot legions, though these forces had been severely depleted by years of constant warfare and the losses inflicted by scrap code attacks. The Legio Cybernetica cohorts that defended the Imperial Palace represented the last substantial concentration of Loyalist battle automata in the entire Segmentum Solar. The traitor assault on the Eternity Wall spaceport involved massed Domitor formations attempting to breach the fortifications through sheer kinetic force. Dozens of these assault automata advanced in coordinated waves, their graviton hammers pulverizing defensive positions, while corrupted Castellax units provided covering fire. The Loyalist defenders responded with their own robot cohorts, positioning Thanatar siege automata on the upper levels of the fortifications, where they could rain plasma fire onto the advancing traitors. The battle became a grinding attrition struggle, with robots from both sides being destroyed in numbers that would have been unthinkable before the heresy. Each fallen automaton represented centuries of accumulated knowledge and manufacturing capability, losses that the Mechanicum would never fully recover from. The defense of the Sanctum Imperialis gate demonstrated both the capabilities and limitations of battle automata in siege warfare. A mixed force of Blood Angels and Loyalist Mechanicum troops held the gate against repeated traitor assaults. The defenders included a cohort of Castellax units that had been fighting continuously since the siege began, their armor scarred by countless impacts and their weapon systems showing signs of degradation from constant use. When a massive traitor force, including corrupted Domitor units and demon engines, launched a breakthrough attempt, the Castellax cohort formed the anchor of the defensive line. The robots absorbed devastating fire from traitor heavy weapons, their thick armor allowing them to remain functional even after sustaining damage that would have destroyed lighter units. The Datasmith controlling the cohort, a veteran tech priest named Archon Vex, maintained perfect coordination despite having lost his left arm to a plasma strike earlier in the battle. His Cortex controller, damaged but still functional, kept the Castellax fighting with mechanical precision even as the defensive line threatened to collapse around them. The breakthrough came when traitor scrapcode penetrated the Castellax Cortex defenses through a vulnerability in their sensory processing systems. 2 of the 6 robots in the cohort suddenly ceased firing at the traitors and turned their weapons on nearby Imperial Army positions. Archon-Vex immediately triggered emergency shutdown protocols, but the corrupted units had already killed dozens of defenders before their cortexes could be locked down. The loss of 2 Castellax at such a critical moment nearly broke the defensive line entirely. Only the intervention of a Blood Angels assault squad, dropping from the walls to engage the traitor Domitor units in close combat, prevented complete collapse. The incident illustrated the fundamental problem facing all cybernetica operations during the heresy. No amount of screening or protection could guarantee that robots would remain loyal when the enemy possessed scrap-code weapons capable of subverting even the most secure cortexes. The final assault on the Imperial Palace saw the deployment of battle automata that had been so heavily corrupted by warp energies that they barely resembled their original patterns. Dark Mechanicum tech priests had fused demon essences directly into cortex matrices, creating hybrid abominations that possessed capabilities far beyond normal robot parameters. These corrupted automata moved through solid walls, their physical forms partially phased into the Imperium. Their weapons fired ammunition that should not have existed, shells that contained bound demons or energies drawn directly from the warp. Loyalist forces that engaged these corrupted robots reported that conventional anti-armor weapons proved ineffective, the rounds passing through chassis that flickered between material and immaterial states. Only blessed weapons, or those wielded by individuals with strong faith, could reliably damage these warp-twisted machines. The catastrophic losses sustained by Legio Cybernetica forces during the Siege of Terra effectively broke the organization as a cohesive military force. Thousands of battle automata were destroyed in the fighting, their irreplaceable cortex units shattered beyond any hope of recovery. Entire cohorts were lost to scrapcode corruption, their datasmiths killed, and their robots either destroyed by loyalist forces or claimed by the traitors. The manufacturing facilities on Mars that produced new robots and cortex crystals had been devastated during the schism, with critical equipment destroyed and irreplaceable knowledge lost when key tech priests died or fled into the Eye of Terror with the retreating traitor forces. The few Cybernetica units that survived the siege emerged as shadows of their former strength, depleted in numbers and traumatized by the experience of fighting corrupted versions of themselves. The technological degradation extended beyond simple numbers. The constant exposure to scrap code and warp energies had contaminated data archives and manufacturing templates throughout the Mechanicum. Tech priests discovered that cortex crystal growth matrices had been subtly altered by warp taint, producing crystals that functioned normally but carried hidden vulnerabilities. Weapon system schematics had been corrupted with errors that would not manifest until the weapons were deployed in combat. Even the sacred rituals used to awaken and bind machine spirits showed signs of contamination, with litanies that had been spoken for millennia suddenly producing unexpected results. The Mechanicum responded with massive purges of potentially corrupted data, but the process was necessarily incomplete. No one could be certain which archives remained pure and which had been tainted by the heresy's corruption. The Dark Mechanicum forces that fled to the Eye of Terror took with them substantial cybernetica assets and the knowledge to produce more. These traitor tech priests continued their experiments with warp-augmented robotics, creating increasingly twisted versions of battle automata that bore little resemblance to their imperial origins. Free from any doctrinal constraints, they pursued research into true artificial intelligence augmented with demonic possession, cortex designs that incorporated human neural tissue harvested from unwilling victims, and weapon systems that drew power directly from the Imperium. The abominations they created would plague the Imperium for millennia to come, appearing in traitor warbands and chaos invasions as corrupted mockeries of the Legio Cybernetica's original purpose. The loyalist Mechanicum emerged from the heresy with a profound distrust of robot technology that went beyond even their traditional caution. The demonstration that cortexes could be corrupted so easily, that machine spirits could be turned against their handlers through warp-tainted code, reinforced the ancient fear of artificial intelligence. Many tech priests argued for complete abandonment of battle automata in favor of more controllable weapon systems. Others advocated for continued use, but with such extensive restrictions and safeguards that robots became impractical for most applications. The debate consumed the Mechanicum for decades following the heresy, with various factions proposing different solutions to the fundamental problem of how to employ powerful automated weapons without risking corruption or rebellion. The immediate aftermath of the Horus heresy left the Mechanicum in a state of technological and spiritual crisis that would fundamentally reshape its relationship with battle automata. The Forge worlds that had remained loyal to the Emperor faced devastation on a scale that made simple reconstruction impossible. Mars itself bore scars from the Civil War that would never fully heal, with entire Forge complexes reduced to radioactive slag and manufacturing districts transformed into mass graves. The schism had killed or driven into exile many of the most knowledgeable tech priests, taking with them expertise that existed nowhere else in the Imperium. The production facilities for Cortex crystals, already rare and difficult to operate before the war, had suffered particularly severe damage. Critical equipment lay shattered, its function understood by tech priests who now served the Dark Mechanicum, or whose ashes mixed with Martian dust. The loss of standard template construct knowledge accelerated dramatically during this period. The fighting on Mars had destroyed data archives that dated back to the Age of Strife, their contents vaporized by plasma fire or corrupted beyond recovery by scrap code infiltration. Tech priests attempting to restore manufacturing capability discovered that crucial steps in various production processes had been recorded only in archives that no longer existed. The rituals for growing perfect Cortex crystals, passed down through generations of cybernetica adepts, proved incomplete when the eldest practitioners failed to survive the heresy. Younger tech priests attempted to reconstruct the missing knowledge through experimentation and analysis of existing crystals, but their efforts produced inconsistent results. Cortex units grown in the post-heresy period showed higher failure rates and increased susceptibility to degradation compared to pre-heresy manufacture. The weapon systems that equipped battle automata faced similar knowledge erosion. The Darkfire cannons mounted on some Castellax patterns required exotic materials whose sources had been lost during the heresy. Forge worlds that had supplied these materials either lay in ruins or had sided with the traitors and fled into the Eye of Terror. The graviton technology that powered Domitor hammers and other specialized weapons depended on manufacturing techniques preserved in archives that had been deliberately purged due to scrap code contamination. Tech priests could still maintain and repair existing weapons, but producing new ones became increasingly difficult and eventually impossible for certain patterns. Each battle that destroyed a Thanator or Domitor represented not just the loss of a valuable war machine, but the permanent reduction of capabilities that could never be restored. The psychological trauma inflicted by widespread Cortex corruption during the heresy proved as damaging as the physical losses. Datasmiths who had watched their robots turn against them carried scars that no amount of augmetic surgery could address. The betrayal cut deeper than simple combat losses. These tech priests had spent decades building rapport with their automata, learning the subtle variations in each machine spirit's behavior, performing the daily rituals that maintained proper function. To see those carefully tended machine spirits corrupted into weapons against the Imperium violated something fundamental in the relationship between tech priest and machine. Many datasmiths who survived the heresy refused to work with battle automata again, requesting transfers to other specializations within the Mechanicum despite their irreplaceable expertise. The broader Mechanicum hierarchy responded to these failures by implementing restrictions on robot technology that went far beyond pre-heresy protocols. The Fabricator General issued edicts requiring multiple redundant safeguards on all Cortex units, mandating inspection schedules so intensive that they consumed more tech priest labor than the robots themselves provided in combat value. New manufacturing standards specified that Cortex crystals must undergo months of testing and observation before installation in operational chassis, with any unit showing the slightest deviation from baseline parameters immediately rejected. The Cortex controller designs were revised to include additional override systems and emergency shutdown mechanisms, though these modifications made the controllers more complex and prone to malfunction. The theological interpretation of what constituted acceptable machine spirit behavior shifted toward extreme conservatism. Tech priests who had previously accepted moderate cortex degradation and the development of minor personality quirks now viewed any deviation from factory baseline as potential evidence of emerging artificial intelligence. The distinction between a machine's spirit displaying acceptable learned behavior and one developing dangerous autonomy became subject to intense scrutiny and debate. Datasmiths found themselves defending decisions to keep veteran robots in service against accusations that they were tolerating proto-consciousness. The practical effect was that battle automata were retired from service much earlier than pre-heresy practice, even when they remained fully functional and showed no actual signs of problematic behavior. The increasing paranoia about autonomous systems extended beyond battle automata to affect all forms of automated technology. Manufacturing systems that had operated with minimal human oversight for centuries suddenly required constant monitoring by ordained tech priests. Servitor production increased dramatically as the Mechanicum sought alternatives to purely mechanical automation. The servitor, that grotesque hybrid of human flesh and machine components, offered a solution that satisfied both practical needs and theological concerns. By incorporating lobotomized human neural tissue into automated systems, the Mechanicum created workers that could perform complex tasks requiring judgment and adaptation, while remaining safely incapable of independent thought or rebellion. The human components, reduced to barely conscious biological processors, could not develop the kind of emergent consciousness that threatened in purely mechanical systems. The shift toward servitor technology accelerated throughout the centuries following the heresy. Forge worlds that had relied heavily on battle automata for defense and labor began replacing their robot cohorts with servitor equivalents. Combat servitors, equipped with integrated weapons and basic tactical programming, took over many roles previously filled by Castellax or other automata patterns. These servitors lacked the durability and firepower of true battle automata, but they offered advantages that outweighed their inferior combat capability. Servitor cortexes, based on organic neural tissue rather than crystalline matrices, proved far more resistant to scrapcode corruption. The warp-tainted code that could subvert a robot cortex in minutes often failed entirely against servitor wetware, unable to interface properly with biological processing systems. The human components also provided a measure of protection against demonic possession, as the remnant soul fragments in servitor tissue seemed to resist the kind of complete takeover that affected purely mechanical systems. The manufacturing advantages of servitors over robots proved equally compelling. Where a battle automaton required months of careful construction and the incorporation of increasingly rare components, a servitor could be produced in weeks using materials available on any forge world. The human raw material came from multiple sources: criminals sentenced to servitorization, failed aspirants from Space Marine recruitment, workers who had suffered industrial accidents, or simply individuals purchased from the vast reservoir of humanity spread across Imperial worlds. The lobotomization process and subsequent augmentation with mechanical components followed standardized procedures that required less specialized knowledge than cortex crystal growth or battle automata assembly. A forge world that could produce perhaps a dozen new robots per year could manufacture hundreds or thousands of servitors in the same period. The Legio Cybernetica found itself increasingly marginalized within the Mechanicum hierarchy as servitor technology gained prominence. The organization that had once been among the most prestigious branches of the cult Mechanicus saw its influence and resources steadily diminish. Forge worlds that had maintained substantial Cybernetica contingents began reducing their robot cohorts, either through attrition or deliberate decommissioning. The tech priests with expertise in battle automata maintenance and cortex technology represented a dwindling pool of specialists whose knowledge was no longer valued as it had been. Younger adepts seeking advancement within the Mechanicum found better opportunities in other specializations, leaving the Cybernetica with an aging cadre of practitioners and few replacements for those who died or retired. The fragmentation of Legio Cybernetica forces proceeded gradually over the centuries following the heresy. Cohorts that had fought together during the Great Crusade were dispersed to different Forge worlds as the Mechanicum reorganized its military assets. The centralized command structure that had coordinated Cybernetica operations across the Imperium dissolved, replaced by local control under individual Forge world hierarchies. Battle automata cohorts became garrison forces assigned to protect specific facilities rather than mobile military units available for deployment wherever needed. A Castellax cohort that might once have fought on dozens of worlds across a sector now spent decades or centuries standing guard over a single Forge complex, its capabilities underutilized and its machine spirits degrading from lack of proper operational employment. Some Forge worlds maintain more substantial Cybernetica capabilities than others, typically those with strong historical connections to robot technology or unique manufacturing capacity. Graia continued producing battle automata in limited numbers, its tech priests preserving knowledge that had been lost elsewhere. Metalica maintained operational robot cohorts for Forge defense, though even there the numbers steadily declined. Mars itself retained the largest concentration of Cybernetica assets, but even the Red Planet saw its robot legions shrink to a fraction of their pre-heresy strength. The battle automata that remained in service became increasingly precious, their irreplaceable nature making Forge world hierarchies reluctant to risk them in combat operations where they might be destroyed or corrupted. The relegation of battle automata to specialized garrison duty reflected both practical concerns and theological imperatives. The practical argument held that robots were too valuable and too vulnerable to corruption for deployment in offensive operations, where they faced unknown threats and potentially hostile scrap code. Better to use them in defensive roles, where they operated in controlled environments under constant observation by tech priests who could monitor for signs of malfunction or corruption. The theological position maintained that machine spirits functioned most safely when confined to repetitive, predictable duties, rather than exposed to the chaos and unpredictability of active campaigning. A Castellax standing guard over a Forge entrance performed its function within narrow, well-defined parameters. That same Castellax deployed to a war zone faced countless situations that might trigger unexpected behaviors or create opportunities for scrap code infiltration. The few Cybernetica cohorts that did see active deployment in the millennia following the heresy operated under restrictions that severely limited their effectiveness. Datasmiths received orders to maintain constant direct control, never allowing their robots to operate autonomously even within previously acceptable parameters. Battle automata were forbidden from accessing any external data sources that might carry scrap code, effectively blinding them to tactical information from other Imperial forces. The Cortex controllers themselves were modified to include remote shutdown capabilities that allowed tech priests far from the battlefield to disable robots if corruption was suspected. These safeguards made the battle automata more secure, but also reduced them to little more than remote-controlled weapons platforms, their sophisticated machine spirits constrained to the point where servitors with integrated weapons could perform nearly as well. The knowledge required to maintain existing battle automata became increasingly concentrated in the hands of a shrinking number of specialists. The rituals for Cortex maintenance, weapon system calibration, and machine spirit sanctification were passed down through master-apprentice relationships within the Cybernetica cult. As older tech priests died without training sufficient replacements, critical knowledge disappeared entirely. By the 32nd millennium, certain procedures that had been routine during the Great Crusade had become mysteries that even the most learned Cybernetica adepts could not fully explain. Tech priests performed the rituals because tradition demanded it, but their understanding of why specific steps mattered, or what the rituals actually accomplished, had degraded to the point where they worked more from rote memorization than genuine comprehension. The few Forge worlds that attempted to reverse the decline and restore Cybernetica capabilities to their former glory found themselves fighting against accumulated entropy. Jules Prime undertook an ambitious program to reconstruct lost manufacturing knowledge through analysis of existing battle automata and fragmentary archive data. The project consumed decades and vast resources, producing cortex crystals that technically functioned but showed subtle abnormalities in their behavior patterns. The Castellax units built using these crystals operated within acceptable parameters for years before their machine spirits began exhibiting concerning tendencies toward autonomous behavior. The entire production run had to be decommissioned and the crystals destroyed, the project abandoned as a failure that validated the conservative approach of other Forge worlds. The development of new battle automata patterns effectively ceased in the post-heresy period. The Mechanicum lost the capability and the will to innovate in robotics, focusing instead on preserving what knowledge remained of existing patterns. Proposals for improved designs or new tactical variants faced immediate rejection from Forge world hierarchies, unwilling to risk deviating from proven templates. The argument held that any innovation might accidentally recreate the conditions that led to the Men of Iron rebellion or make cortexes more vulnerable to corruption. Better to maintain existing patterns, even as the knowledge to manufacture them slowly eroded, than risk catastrophe through experimentation. This technological stagnation became self-reinforcing, as each generation of tech priests knew less than their predecessors and had fewer resources to work with. The specialized Forge world garrisons, where battle automata cohorts were stationed, became isolated repositories of cybernetica knowledge and practice. These facilities maintained their own training programs, initiated new datasmiths from among the local tech priest population, and preserved rituals that had been abandoned elsewhere. The garrison assignments that might have seemed like relegation to backwater duties actually ensured the survival of cybernetica expertise through the dark millennia that followed the heresy. A datasmith stationed at a Forge world for centuries developed deep familiarity with their specific robots and local conditions, accumulating practical knowledge that could not be found in any archive. These specialists became the living libraries of their craft, their augmented memories containing details of maintenance procedures, cortex quirks, and machine spirit behaviors that existed nowhere else. The relationship between the declining cybernetica forces and the broader Imperial military evolved into an awkward dependency. The Astra Militarum and Space Marine chapters recognized that battle automata, when available, provided capabilities that other Imperial forces could not match. A single Thanator could deliver firepower equivalent to an entire artillery battery. A Castellax cohort could hold positions that would require a company of Imperial Guard to defend. Yet obtaining cybernetica support for military operations became increasingly difficult as Forge worlds hoarded their dwindling robot assets. Requests for battle automata deployment faced layers of mechanicum bureaucracy and theological review, with tech priests demanding extensive justification for risking precious robots in combat operations. Many Imperial commanders learned to plan campaigns without expecting cybernetica support, treating any robot assistance they did receive as an unexpected bonus rather than a reliable asset. The few battle automata that remained in active service by the 41st millennium had become relics from an earlier age, their chassis bearing the scars of millennia of warfare and repair. These ancient robots possessed machine spirits that had developed complex personalities through centuries of operation, their cortexes degraded from baseline, but still functioning within acceptable parameters through constant maintenance and reconsecration. The datasmiths who controlled these veterans treated them with a reverence that bordered on worship, understanding that each robot represented irreplaceable heritage from the Great Crusade era. When one of these ancient automata finally failed beyond repair, the loss was mourned as the passing of a warrior whose service dated back to the Imperium's founding. The production of battle automata in the 41st millennium remains concentrated on a handful of Forge worlds that have managed to preserve the necessary knowledge and infrastructure through 10,000 years of decline. These worlds guard their manufacturing capabilities with obsessive secrecy, understanding that their ability to produce robots grants them political influence within the Mechanicum hierarchy that might otherwise elude them. The forge complexes where battle automata are assembled exist as sacred spaces, their workshops sealed behind multiple layers of security and restricted to tech priests who have undergone decades of training and ideological conditioning. Even among these elite specialists, the complete knowledge of robot production is compartmentalized, with individual tech priests understanding only their specific portion of the manufacturing process. Metallica stands among the most significant producers of battle automata, its forges having maintained continuous robot production since before the Horus Heresy. The Forge World's Cybernetica Manufactoria occupy a sprawling complex on the planet's northern continent, a series of interconnected facilities that cover hundreds of square kilometers. The outer workshops handle basic component fabrication, with servitor crews operating massive stamping presses that shape armor plates and structural members from refined adamantium and plasteel alloys. These components undergo initial blessing by junior tech priests who anoint each piece with sacred oils while reciting the litany of proper form. The blessed components then move deeper into the complex, transported through sealed corridors where atmospheric conditions are precisely controlled to prevent contamination. The Cortex crystal growth chambers occupy the innermost sanctum of the Metallica Manufactoria, buried deep beneath the surface where seismic activity and electromagnetic interference reach minimal levels. These chambers maintain perfect environmental stability, their walls lined with ancient machinery whose function the current tech priests understand only through rote operation rather than genuine comprehension. The crystal growth process requires months of careful cultivation, with nutrient solutions of exotic minerals being introduced according to schedules established millennia ago. Tech priests monitor the growing crystals constantly, watching for any deviation from expected development patterns. The failure rate runs approximately 40%, with crystals developing flaws or irregularities that render them unsuitable for Cortex construction. Those crystals that do mature properly undergo extensive testing before being certified for installation in battle automata chassis. Metallica's robot production focuses primarily on the Castellax pattern, the Forge world having lost the capability to manufacture the more complex Thanator and Domitor designs during the Heresy. The tech priests maintain detailed records of every Castellax produced in their workshops, tracking each robot through its entire service life and documenting any behavioral anomalies or maintenance issues. This data serves both practical and theological purposes. Practically, it helps identify patterns in cortex degradation and mechanical failure that might inform future production. Theologically, it demonstrates proper stewardship of sacred machine spirits, proving to Mechanicum authorities that Metallica handles its robot manufacturing responsibilities with appropriate reverence and care. The actual assembly of a Castellax at Metallica follows procedures that blend technical precision with religious ritual in ways that outside observers would find difficult to distinguish. The chassis construction begins with the installation of the power core, a plasma reactor that must be aligned according to specifications measured in microns. Tech priests chant the canticle of stable fusion, while servitors bolt the reactor housing into place, their mechanical augmentations allowing them to work with the precision required. The leg assemblies attach next, their motive systems tested individually before integration with the main chassis. Each joint receives anointing with blessed lubricants, whose formulas date back to the dark age of technology, though the modern Mechanicum has lost understanding of why these specific compounds work better than alternatives. The Cortex installation represents the most critical and sacred phase of assembly. The prepared crystal, having passed all tests and received extensive blessing, is transported to the assembly chamber in a sealed container that blocks all electromagnetic radiation. The senior tech priest overseeing the assembly personally handles the Cortex installation, their augmented fingers manipulating the delicate crystal into its housing while reciting prayers that invoke the machine god's favor. The Cortex interfaces connect through crystalline filaments that must be aligned with perfect precision, any misalignment potentially causing catastrophic failure when the machine's spirit awakens. The installation process takes hours, with the tech priest working in complete silence except for the prescribed prayers, their concentration absolute as they perform surgery on the robot's nascent consciousness. Once the cortex is installed and all physical systems are connected, the awakening ritual begins. This ceremony involves the entire team of tech priests who worked on the castle axe's construction, each contributing their portion of the liturgy that will bring the machine's spirit to consciousness. The ritual spans 3 days, with the tech priests taking shifts to maintain constant recitation of the awakening prayers. Power flows into the cortex in carefully measured increments, allowing the machine's spirit to emerge gradually rather than shocking it into sudden awareness. The tech priests monitor thousands of parameters as the cortex activates, watching for any sign that the awakening is proceeding abnormally. When the machine spirit finally achieves full consciousness on the 3rd day, the castle axe undergoes immediate testing to verify that all behavioral algorithms function within acceptable parameters. Greya maintains a different approach to robot production, its manufactoria specializing in the restoration and refurbishment of existing battle automata rather than construction of new units from scratch. The Forge world serves as a repository for damaged or degraded robots from across its sector, with Cybernetica cohorts shipping their casualties to Greya for repair when possible. The workshops on Greya have accumulated vast stocks of salvaged components, entire warehouses filled with armor plates, weapon systems, and structural members recovered from destroyed automata. The tech priests who work in these facilities possess expertise in reverse engineering damaged systems and fabricating replacement parts when original components cannot be salvaged. The Greya approach reflects practical necessity born from incomplete knowledge. The Forge world lost portions of its manufacturing archives during the Age of Apostasy, when civil conflict destroyed several key data repositories. The surviving tech priests could no longer produce certain components from raw materials, but discovered they could replicate parts by using existing examples as templates. This reverse engineering methodology allowed Greya to maintain its Cybernetica capabilities despite gaps in its theoretical knowledge. A tech priest examining a damaged castle axe power core might not understand the fundamental principles that make it function, but they can measure its physical structure, analyze its materials, and create a duplicate that works identically to the original. The refurbishment process at Greya begins with complete disassembly of the damaged robot. Tech priests catalog every component, assessing which parts can be restored, which must be replaced, and which have degraded beyond recovery. The cortex receives particular attention, with specialists performing detailed analysis to determine if the crystal matrix remains viable or if the machine spirit has been too severely damaged. Cortex restoration represents some of the most delicate work performed anywhere in the Imperium, requiring tech priests to repair fractures in crystal structures while preserving the encoded algorithms and accumulated experience that give each machine spirit its unique character. Success rates for cortex restoration hover around 30%, with many crystals proving too damaged to save despite the tech priest's best efforts. Greya's workshops also serve as training grounds for datasmiths from across the sector. The constant flow of damaged robots provides opportunities for aspiring Cybernetica specialists to gain practical experience with battle automata maintenance and repair. These apprentice datasmiths spend years working under master tech priests, learning to diagnose cortex malfunctions, calibrate weapon systems, and perform the countless minor adjustments that keep ancient robots functioning. The training emphasizes hands-on problem solving over theoretical knowledge, reflecting Greya's pragmatic approach to preserving Cybernetica expertise. An apprentice might not be able to explain why a particular ritual works, but they learn to perform it correctly and recognize when the results deviate from expected outcomes. Ryza maintains perhaps the most conservative approach to robot production among the major Cybernetica Forge worlds. The tech priests of Ryza adhere strictly to manufacturing procedures established during the Great Crusade, refusing to deviate from ancient protocols even when such flexibility might improve efficiency or outcomes. This orthodoxy stems from theological conviction rather than mere tradition. The Ryza-Tech priests believe that the original STC templates represent divine revelation from the machine god, and that any modification to these templates constitutes heresy regardless of practical benefits. Their manufactoria operate according to schedules and procedures that have remained unchanged for 10,000 years, with each step performed exactly as it was during the Imperium's founding. The Ryza production facilities specialize in Casilax manufacture, though their output has declined steadily over the millennia as critical resources become scarcer. The Forge world once produced dozens of battle automata annually, but current production rates have fallen to perhaps 3 or 4 robots per year. This decline reflects not loss of knowledge, but shortage of materials. The exotic minerals required for Cortex crystal growth come from sources that have been exhausted or lost to alien invasion. The specialized alloys used in chassis construction require materials that the Imperium no longer has reliable access to. The Ryza-Tech priests maintain perfect understanding of how to build Casilax units, but they lack sufficient raw materials to exercise this knowledge at scale. The political tensions within the Mechanicum regarding continued robot use manifest most clearly in debates over resource allocation for cybernetica programs. Forge worlds that maintain battle automata production face constant pressure from other factions within the cult Mechanicus who argue that the resources devoted to robots would be better spent on more reliable weapon systems. The servitor advocates point out that combat servitors can be produced in far greater numbers using readily available materials, while battle automata require exotic components that might be allocated to other critical needs. The tank and artillery factions argue that conventional armored vehicles provide equivalent firepower without the theological risks inherent in sophisticated machine spirits. The Archmagos Cybernetica, who oversee robot production, defend their programs by emphasizing capabilities that no other Imperial weapon system can match. A properly functioning Thanatter provides fire support that would require multiple artillery batteries to replicate, and it can operate in environments where conventional artillery cannot be deployed. Casilax units can hold defensive positions under conditions that would cause catastrophic casualties among human troops or servitors. The Archmagos also invoke historical precedent, arguing that battle automata served the Imperium faithfully for thousands of years before the heresy, and that the corruption incidents during that conflict resulted from dark Mechanicum interference rather than inherent flaws in robot technology. These debates consume vast amounts of time and political capital within Forge world hierarchies. Councils of senior tech priests convene to review cybernetica programs, examining production records and operational reports to determine whether continued robot manufacture justifies the resource investment. The Archmagos Cybernetica must present detailed arguments defending every aspect of their operations, from Cortex crystal growth procedures to battlefield deployment protocols. They face skeptical questioning from tech priests who view robot technology as a dangerous relic from a more naive age, when the Mechanicum had not yet learned the full dangers of sophisticated machine spirits. The preservation of robot construction knowledge has become increasingly dependent on individual Archmagos Cybernetica and their personal archives. These senior tech priests accumulate vast stores of technical data throughout their centuries of service, their augmented memories containing procedures and specifications that exist nowhere else in the Imperium. When an Archmagos Cybernetica dies, their successors face the daunting task of extracting this knowledge from cerebral implants and data storage augmentations before it degrades beyond recovery. The process remains imperfect, with some information inevitably lost during each generational transition. The accumulated effect over millennia has been steady erosion of manufacturing knowledge, each generation understanding slightly less than their predecessors. Some Forge worlds have attempted to arrest this decline through aggressive documentation programs, with tech priests tasked with recording every aspect of robot production in exhaustive detail. These efforts produce massive archives that theoretically contain complete manufacturing specifications, but but the reality proves more complex. The documents capture explicit procedures, but struggle to convey the tacit knowledge that experienced tech priests develop through years of hands-on work. A written instruction might specify that a Cortex crystal should be properly aligned during installation, but only an experienced archmagos truly understands what proper alignment feels like when manipulating the delicate crystal with augmented fingers. This gap between documented knowledge and practical expertise means that even comprehensive archives cannot fully replace the loss of skilled practitioners. The few Forge worlds that maintain active cybernetica programs operate in a state of constant vigilance against the twin threats of knowledge loss and scrapcode corruption. The Manufactoria employ extensive security measures that go far beyond physical barriers and armed guards. Electromagnetic shielding blocks unauthorized transmissions that might carry hostile code. Servitor crews continuously monitor all data systems for signs of infiltration. Tech priests perform regular audits of manufacturing equipment, checking for any modifications or corruptions that might have been introduced by enemy agents or demonic influence. These security measures consume significant resources, but are considered absolutely necessary given the catastrophic consequences of compromised robot production. The relationship between Forge World Cybernetica programs and the broader Mechanicum hierarchy remains characterized by mutual suspicion and grudging cooperation. The Archmagos Cybernetica need support from Forge World leadership to maintain their programs, requiring allocation of resources and political protection from critics who would shut down robot production entirely. The Forge World hierarchies value the prestige and military capability that battle automata provide, but worry constantly about the risks these weapons represent. This tension produces an uneasy equilibrium where cybernetica programs survive but operate under increasingly restrictive conditions that limit their effectiveness and growth potential. The Castellan robot represents the most common battle automaton pattern still in widespread use during the era Indomitus, a distinction that speaks both to the design's inherent robustness and to the catastrophic decline in the Mechanicum's ability to maintain more sophisticated automata. Where the Castellax, Domitor, and Thanator patterns have become vanishingly rare relics guarded jealously by Forge worlds that can barely maintain them, the Castellan continues to serve in Mechanicum forces across the Imperium in numbers that, while modest by Great Crusade standards, dwarf the deployment of any other robot pattern. This prevalence stems from manufacturing advantages that the ancient tech priests who designed the Castellan built into its fundamental architecture, creating a robot that sacrifices sophistication and flexibility for reliability and maintainability. The Castellan stands roughly twice the height of a human, its blocky chassis built around a central cortex housing protected by layers of dense armor plating. The design philosophy emphasizes survivability through redundancy and thickness, rather than the elegant armor configurations that characterized older patterns. Where a Castellax distributed its armor in overlapping plates that provided protection while maintaining mobility, the Castellan simply mounts massive slabs of reinforced ceramite and plasteel that can absorb tremendous punishment through sheer mass. This approach makes the Castellan slower and less agile than its predecessors, but it also means the robot can continue functioning after sustaining damage that would cripple more sophisticated designs. Battle reports document Castellan units operating effectively despite having portions of their chassis literally blown away, their redundant systems and compartmentalized construction allowing them to fight on when other automata would have shut down. The Cortex technology that animates the Castellan represents a deliberate simplification compared to the sophisticated machine spirits found in Great Crusade-era battle automata. The Castellan Cortex operates according to fixed behavioral protocols rather than the adaptive algorithms that allowed Castellax units to evaluate tactical situations and select appropriate responses. A Castellan cannot assess threats and prioritize targets based on complex battlefield analysis. Instead, it executes whichever protocol has been loaded into its cortex, following that protocol's instructions with absolute mechanical precision until its datasmith changes the programming. This limitation makes the Castellan less tactically flexible than older robot patterns, but it also makes the Cortex far simpler to manufacture and significantly more resistant to scrapcode corruption. The behavioral protocols that govern Castellan operation come in several standard varieties, though individual Forge worlds have developed their own specialized variants over the millennia. The most common protocols are designated Protector and Conqueror, representing defensive and offensive operational modes. A Castellan running Protector protocol configures itself for static defense, its machine spirit prioritizing target acquisition and sustained fire over movement or tactical repositioning. The robot plants itself in position and methodically engages any threats that enter its sensor range, its Cortex calculating firing solutions with mechanical precision while its heavy frame absorbs return fire. Protector protocol makes the Castellan function essentially as an automated weapons platform, trading mobility for maximum firepower and durability in defensive operations. Conqueror protocol transforms the Castellan's behavior entirely, shifting its operational parameters toward aggressive assault. The robot advances steadily toward designated objectives, its machine spirit focused on closing with enemies and destroying them through overwhelming firepower at close range. Castellan units running Conqueror protocol march forward with inexorable momentum, their heavy armor allowing them to push through defensive fire that would stop lighter units. The protocol includes basic obstacle avoidance and threat response algorithms, but these remain far simpler than the tactical evaluation systems found in older battle automata. A Castellan in Conqueror mode will advance along the most direct route to its objective, crushing through barriers and engaging any enemies that block its path, but it cannot formulate flanking maneuvers or adapt to unexpected tactical situations without datasmith intervention. The datasmith assigned to a Castellan cohort bears responsibility for reprogramming the robots between protocols as tactical situations demand. This reprogramming requires the datasmith to approach each robot individually and interface their Cortex controller directly with the Castellan's access ports, a process that takes several minutes per robot and leaves both datasmith and automaton vulnerable during the procedure. The physical requirement for direct interface represents a deliberate security measure, preventing remote protocol changes that might be exploited by enemy scrap code or allow corrupted robots to alter their own programming. The inconvenience of requiring manual reprogramming is accepted as necessary cost for maintaining proper control over the machine spirits. The reprogramming process itself involves the datasmith's Cortex controller transmitting new behavioral algorithms to the Castellan Cortex while simultaneously purging the previous protocol. The Castellan enters a brief dormant state during this transfer, its machine spirit essentially unconscious as the new programming overwrites the old. Tech priests debate whether this process causes any lasting effect on the machine spirit, with some arguing that repeated reprogramming gradually degrades Cortex function, while others maintain that the simple Castellan Cortex design makes it immune to such concerns. Practical experience suggests that Castellan units can undergo thousands of protocol changes throughout their service lives without significant degradation, though extremely ancient robots sometimes develop quirks in how they execute specific protocols. The armament configurations available for Castellan robots reflect the design's focus on overwhelming firepower over tactical flexibility. The most common weapon loadout consists of twin-linked heavy phosphor blasters, massive energy weapons that project streams of phosphorescent particles capable of burning through armor and setting targets ablaze with chemical fire. The phosphor rounds ignite upon contact with air, creating secondary fires that can spread across enemy positions and deny area to defending troops. The heavy phosphor blasters mount on the Castellan's arms, their substantial bulk requiring the robot's reinforced frame to handle the recoil and heat generation. A Castellan equipped with these weapons can maintain sustained fire that devastates infantry formations and damages light vehicles, the phosphor rounds creating walls of burning death that few enemies can advance through. Alternative armament includes incendiing combustors, even more devastating close-range weapons that project streams of burning promethium mixed with chemical accelerants. These weapons function as oversized flamers, capable of immolating entire squads with single bursts and clearing fortified positions through sheer thermal destruction. Castellan units equipped with incendiing combustors typically operate in Conqueror protocol, advancing to close range where their weapons achieve maximum effect. The sight of burning Castellan robots marching through defensive fire while projecting walls of flame creates profound psychological impact on defenders, many of whom break and flee rather than face immolation by mechanical monsters that cannot be deterred or demoralized. Some Castellan units mount Castellan fists, massive power weapons that combine physical striking power with energy field disruption. These fists serve dual purposes as both weapons and utility tools, allowing the robot to smash through obstacles, breach fortifications, or crush enemies in close combat. A Castellan fist strike delivers force measured in tons, backed by the robot's substantial mass, and powered by the same reactor that drives its other systems. The energy field surrounding the fist disrupts molecular bonds on contact, allowing the weapon to punch through armor that might resist purely kinetic impacts. Castellan units equipped with fists typically carry ranged weapons as well, the combination allowing them to engage at distance before closing for devastating melee attacks. The tactical deployment of Castellan cohorts within Adeptus Mechanicus Scutari forces follows doctrines developed over millennia of warfare. The robots serve as mobile fire support platforms and breakthrough units, their durability and firepower compensating for the relative fragility of Scutari infantry. A typical deployment sees Castellan units positioned to provide covering fire, while Scutari Rangers and Vanguard advance, the robots' heavy weapons suppressing enemy positions and eliminating threats that the infantry cannot safely engage. The Castellans' resistance to small arms fire and ability to operate in hostile environments makes them ideal for holding critical positions or anchoring defensive lines where human troops would suffer unsustainable casualties. The integration of Castellan cohorts with Scutari maniples requires careful coordination between the datasmith and the Scutari Alpha commanding the infantry. The datasmith maintains absolute control over their robots, deciding when to reprogram protocols and which targets the Castellan units engage. However, effective employment requires the datasmith to coordinate these decisions with the broader tactical plan developed by the Scutari commander. This coordination works best when the datasmith and Alpha have experience working together, having developed understanding of each other's capabilities and tactical preferences through previous operations. New partnerships often struggle initially as the commanders learn to synchronize their forces effectively. The effectiveness of Castellan robots against various threat types varies significantly based on armament configuration and operational protocol. Against massed infantry, Castellan units equipped with heavy phosphor blasters or incendiing combustors prove devastatingly effective, their weapons capable of eliminating entire squads with sustained fire. The robot's durability allows them to advance through defensive fire that would pin down or destroy infantry units, closing to ranges where their weapons achieve maximum effect. The mechanical precision of Castellan targeting systems means that every shot finds its mark, the machine's spirits calculating firing solutions without the hesitation or error that affects even highly trained human soldiers. Against armored vehicles, Castellan effectiveness depends heavily on weapon loadout. Heavy phosphor blasters can damage light vehicles and suppress crew-served weapons, but they struggle against heavy armor. Castellan fists prove more effective in anti-armor roles, capable of crushing through vehicle hulls and ripping apart mechanical systems through brute force. However, the Castellan's relatively slow movement speed means that fast-moving vehicles can often avoid close combat, forcing the robots to rely on their ranged weapons. Some Forge worlds have developed specialized Castellan variants mounting heavier anti-armor weapons, though these remain relatively rare compared to standard configurations. The Castellan's performance against Xeno's threats has been extensively documented across millennia of warfare. Against orc hordes, the robots excel at creating killing zones that even the most frenzied greenskins struggle to cross. The combination of heavy firepower and mechanical durability allows Castellan units to hold positions against orc charges that would overwhelm human defenders through sheer weight of numbers. The orcs' preference for close combat plays into the Castellan's strengths, as the robots can absorb tremendous punishment while methodically eliminating attackers. However, orc technology's unpredictable nature sometimes produces weapons capable of damaging even heavily armored Castellan units, and the greenskins' natural resistance to morale effects means they will continue attacking robots long after human opponents would have broken. Tyrannid swarms present different challenges for Castellan deployment. The bioform's ability to rapidly adapt to threats means that tactics effective against one Tyrannid attack may fail against the next, as the hive mind adjusts its approach. Castellan heavy phosphor blasters prove particularly effective against smaller Tyrannid organisms, the burning phosphor creating barriers that even fearless bioforms hesitate to cross. However, larger Tyrannid creatures can often withstand Castellan firepower long enough to close to melee range, where their bioweapons and massive strength threaten even the robot's heavy armor. The Tyrannid's tendency to attack in overwhelming numbers can saturate Castellan defensive fire, allowing some organisms to reach the robots despite heavy casualties. Chaos forces present unique threats to Castellan cohorts due to their employment of scrapcode weapons and demonic corruption. The simplified Castellan Cortex design provides some protection against scrapcode compared to more sophisticated robot patterns, but no machine spirit is completely immune to warp-tainted code. Datasmiths operating near chaos forces maintain constant vigilance for signs of Cortex corruption, performing frequent neural audits and immediately shutting down any robot showing anomalous behavior. The presence of demons on the battlefield creates additional complications, as these warp entities can sometimes possess or corrupt Castellan units despite the robot's mechanical nature. Tech priests have developed specific blessing rituals and warding protocols intended to protect Castellan machine spirits from demonic influence, though the effectiveness of these measures remains inconsistent. The maintenance requirements for Castellan robots, while less demanding than those of older battle automata patterns, still represent significant logistical commitments for Mechanicum forces. Each robot requires daily inspection and basic servicing, with tech priests checking weapon systems, power distribution, and cortex function. The simplified design means that many maintenance tasks can be performed by lower-ranking tech priests or even properly trained servitors, reducing the demand for scarce senior specialists. Major repairs and cortex maintenance still require ordained tech priests with specific cybernetica training, but routine upkeep can be handled by personnel with more general technical expertise. The armor plating that gives Castellan robots their remarkable durability requires regular inspection and replacement as battle damage accumulates. Unlike the sophisticated armor configurations of older patterns, Castellan armor plates can be manufactured on most Forge worlds without requiring exotic materials or lost manufacturing techniques. This availability of replacement parts contributes significantly to the pattern's continued widespread use, as Forge worlds can maintain their Castellan cohorts without depending on rare components from distant sources. Battle-damaged robots can often be restored to full function within weeks, rather than the months or years required to repair more complex automata. The Castellan's weapon systems similarly benefit from relative simplicity compared to older patterns. Heavy phosphor blasters and incending combustors use established technology that the Mechanicum understands well and can manufacture reliably. While these weapons lack the exotic capabilities of darkfire cannons or graviton weapons, their reliability and maintainability make them practical choices for sustained military operations. A Castellan cohort can maintain combat effectiveness through extended campaigns, as long as ammunition and basic maintenance supplies remain available. whereas older robot patterns often required specialized support that limited their operational deployment. The Forge worlds that produce Castellan robots in the 41st millennium maintain manufacturing capacity that, while reduced from historical peaks, continues to output new units at rates unmatched by any other battle automata pattern. Mars itself produces several dozen Castellan units annually, with other major Forge worlds like Metallica, Ryza, and Graia contributing additional numbers. This production, modest though it seems compared to the vast output of Leman Russ tanks or other mass-produced Imperial weapons, represents the largest ongoing robot manufacturing program in the Imperium. The accumulated effect over centuries means that Castellan cohorts serve across hundreds of Forge worlds and in countless Mechanicum military operations. The political implications of Castellan prevalence within the Mechanicum hierarchy reflect ongoing debates about the proper role of battle automata in Imperial warfare. The pattern's success in maintaining operational effectiveness despite simplified design validates arguments that sophisticated machine spirits create unnecessary risks. Tech priests who advocate for conservative approaches to robotics point to the Castellan as proof that effective combat automata can be built without approaching the dangerous complexity that led to the cybernetic revolt. The pattern's resistance to scrapcode corruption and its reliable service record support claims that simpler designs offer better security against the threats that plague more advanced robots. However, other factions within the Mechanicum view the Castellan's limitations as unacceptable compromises that waste the potential of battle automata technology. These tech priests argue that the pattern's inflexibility and dependence on constant datasmith intervention reduce its effectiveness compared to older designs that could operate more autonomously. They maintain that the Imperium needs robots capable of sophisticated tactical decision-making, not simple weapons platforms that require constant human oversight. The debate continues across Forge World Councils and Mechanicum conclaves, with neither side able to definitively prove their position given the limited data available from the few remaining older pattern robots. The future of Castellan production and deployment remains subject to the same resource constraints and knowledge erosion that affect all Mechanicum manufacturing. The Cortex crystal growth facilities that produce Castellan machine spirits face the same material shortages and technical challenges as those producing crystals for other patterns. The specialized knowledge required to awaken and program Castellan cortexes continues to concentrate in fewer hands as experienced datasmiths die, without training sufficient replacements. Yet the pattern's relative simplicity and the Mechanicum's extensive experience with its production suggest that Castellan robots will continue serving the Imperium long after the last Castellax or Thanator falls silent, their blocky forms marching across battlefields as living reminders of technologies that humanity can still maintain even if it can no longer fully understand them. The theological divide between servitors and true robots cuts to the heart of the Mechanicum's relationship with artificial intelligence and represents one of the most fundamental debates within the cult Mechanicus. The servitor, that grotesque fusion of lobotomized human flesh and mechanical components, occupies a peculiar position in Mechanicum doctrine. It is simultaneously a sacred tool blessed by the Omnissiah and a grim reminder of humanity's fall from the technological heights of the Dark Age. The servitor's human components, reduced to biological processors stripped of higher consciousness, provide capabilities that purely mechanical systems struggle to replicate while avoiding the existential threat posed by true artificial intelligence. This compromise solution emerged from the ashes of the cybernetic revolt and solidified during the Horus Heresy, when scrapcode corruption demonstrated the vulnerability of sophisticated machine spirits to hostile manipulation. The production of servitors begins with acquisition of suitable human stock. The Mechanicum draws from multiple sources, each carrying different theological implications within the cult's complex hierarchy of beliefs. Criminals sentenced to servitorization represent the most straightforward category, their transformation serving as both punishment and redemption through service to the machine god. failed space marine aspirants whose bodies rejected the gene seed modifications but survived the process provide another source, their enhanced physiology making them valuable base material for heavy-duty servitor conversions. Industrial accidents on Forge worlds generate a steady supply of workers whose injuries leave them unable to continue normal labor, but whose bodies remain suitable for augmentation. Some Forge worlds maintain agreements with planetary governors to purchase individuals from the general population, transactions that skirt the edges of what Imperial law technically permits, but which the Mechanicum justifies through theological necessity. The lobotomization process that transforms a human into a servitor base involves precise surgical intervention into the brain's higher functions. Tech priests performing these procedures must destroy enough neural tissue to eliminate independent thought and personality while preserving the basic cognitive functions required for the servitor's intended tasks. The surgery requires extensive knowledge of human neuroanatomy, though the Mechanicum's understanding remains largely empirical rather than theoretical. The tech priests know which brain regions to ablate to produce desired results, but their comprehension of why these specific interventions work has degraded significantly from Dark Age knowledge. The procedures follow templates established through millennia of experimentation, with variations developed for different servitor types based on the complexity of tasks they will perform. Combat servitors receive less extensive lobotomization than their labor-focused counterparts, as they require retention of basic tactical awareness and threat recognition capabilities. The neural tissue controlling motor functions, visual processing, and threat response remains largely intact, while the regions governing personality, memory formation, and abstract reasoning are destroyed. The resulting servitor can identify enemies, track targets, and operate integrated weapons with mechanical precision, but it cannot question orders, feel fear, or develop preferences about how it executes its functions. The biological components provide processing capabilities that would require sophisticated cortex crystals to replicate mechanically, while the lobotomization ensures the servitor remains safely incapable of the kind of autonomous behavior that might lead to artificial intelligence emergence. The mechanical augmentations integrated into servitor bodies vary enormously based on intended function and the Forge world's manufacturing capabilities. Basic labor servitors receive relatively simple modifications, reinforced skeletal structures to handle heavy loads, additional limbs for specialized tasks, and direct neural interfaces that allow tech priests to issue commands through electromagnetic transmission. Combat servitors undergo more extensive reconstruction, their bodies essentially rebuilt around integrated weapon systems. Heavy bolters, plasma guns, or other weapons replace one or both arms, their ammunition feeds and power supplies integrated directly into the servitor's torso. Targeting systems connect to the servitor's visual cortex, allowing the biological brain to aim and fire the weapons with precision that approaches or exceeds trained human soldiers. The theological justification for servitor use rests on the distinction between biological and mechanical consciousness. The Mechanicum maintains that the human brain, even when reduced to a lobotomized fragment, retains a connection to the soul that purely mechanical systems lack. This soul fragment, however diminished, provides protection against certain forms of corruption that threaten robot cortexes. Scrap code designed to subvert crystalline matrices often fails when confronted with organic neural tissue, the biological processing pathways proving incompatible with code written for mechanical systems. Demonic possession similarly struggles against servitor wetware, as the remnant soul apparently resists complete takeover in ways that machine spirits cannot. These practical advantages reinforce theological arguments that servitors represent the machine god's intended solution to the problem of creating obedient automated workers. The debate within the Mechanicum regarding servitor ethics reveals deep philosophical divisions that rarely surface in official doctrine, but simmer constantly beneath the organization's unified facade. Conservative factions argue that servitorization represents merciful redemption, transforming criminals and the injured into useful servants of the Omnissiah, rather than leaving them to waste in prisons or die from their wounds. These tech priests view the process as spiritually beneficial, claiming that service as a servitor allows the individual's soul to achieve grace through labor that benefits humanity and honors the machine god. The servitor's lack of consciousness becomes a blessing in this interpretation, freeing them from the suffering and doubt that plague fully conscious humans. Progressive elements within the Mechanicum express discomfort with servitor production, though they rarely voice these concerns openly given the practice's deep entrenchment in Mechanicum operations. These tech priests question whether the destruction of human consciousness can truly be justified by practical necessity, arguing that the Mechanicum's dependence on servitors represents moral compromise born from technological failure. If the cult possessed sufficient understanding to create safe, reliable robots, they argue, the need for servitors would disappear entirely. The continued use of lobotomized humans thus serves as constant reminder of the Mechanicum's fallen state, its inability to reclaim the heights of Dark Age technology, forcing it to employ methods that more advanced civilizations would find abhorrent. The practical advantages of servitors over pure robots extend beyond corruption resistance to encompass manufacturing efficiency and resource allocation. A forge world can produce hundreds of servitors in the time required to manufacture a single battle automaton, using materials and facilities that already exist for other purposes. The human bodies come from sources that require no specialized infrastructure to obtain, while the mechanical components use standard Mechanicum technology that any forge world can manufacture. The biological processing provided by the servitor's brain eliminates the need for cortex crystals, those difficult-to-grow matrices that represent the primary bottleneck in robot production. A tech priest overseeing servitor production needs competence in surgery and basic augmentation, rather than the rare expertise required for cortex crystal cultivation and machine spirit awakening. The control systems for servitors operate through fundamentally different principles than those governing battle automata. Where a datasmith uses a cortex controller to transmit complex behavioral protocols to robot machine spirits, servitor handlers employ direct neural command systems that essentially hijack the servitor's motor functions. The handler's commands bypass what remains of the servitor's consciousness, triggering pre-programmed responses at the neurological level. This direct control provides immediate response to handler input, but limits the servitor's ability to operate autonomously. A servitor left without active commands typically enters a standby state, its reduced consciousness insufficient to generate independent action. This limitation makes servitors unsuitable for operations requiring extended autonomous function, but it also guarantees they cannot develop the kind of problematic behaviors that concern Mechanicum authorities when dealing with more sophisticated automata. The degradation patterns that affect servitors differ markedly from those observed in battle automata, where robot cortexes suffer from crystalline fracturing and algorithm decay over centuries of operation. Servitors face biological deterioration that progresses far more rapidly. The lobotomization process damages the brain's self-repair mechanisms, leaving servitor neural tissue vulnerable to cumulative damage from normal operation. The mechanical augmentations create constant stress on biological systems, with immune responses attacking the foreign materials and causing chronic inflammation. Most servitors function effectively for only a few decades before degradation requires their decommissioning and replacement. Heavy combat servitors often last mere years, their bodies and remaining neural tissue breaking down under the stress of integrated weapon systems and battlefield trauma. The Mechanicum's servitor maintenance protocols reflect this rapid degradation through emphasis on replacement rather than long-term care. Tech priests monitor servitor performance for signs of declining function, but they invest minimal resources in extending individual servitor lifespans beyond their expected operational period. When a servitor begins showing signs of serious degradation, the standard response involves decommissioning the unit and installing its mechanical components into a fresh biological base. This approach treats servitors as fundamentally expendable resources, their human origins rendered irrelevant by the lobotomization that destroyed their personhood. The contrast with battle automata maintenance, where ancient robots receive centuries of careful restoration and preservation, illustrates the different value systems applied to biological versus mechanical constructs. The remaining applications where true robots prove superior to servitor alternatives cluster around requirements for extended autonomous operation, extreme environmental conditions, or capabilities that biological components cannot provide. Deep void operations exemplify the first category, as servitors require life support systems and regular biological maintenance that robots can operate indefinitely without. A battle automaton can stand guard in hard vacuum for centuries, its systems requiring only occasional power cell replacement and mechanical servicing. A servitor in the same environment needs constant atmospheric supply, temperature regulation, and eventual replacement as its biological components fail. The logistical burden of supporting servitor operations in void environments often exceeds the cost of deploying more expensive but self-sufficient robots. Extreme radiation environments similarly favor robot deployment over servitors. While servitor handlers can shield biological components with lead plating and rad-resistant materials, the fundamental vulnerability of organic tissue to radiation damage limits servitor effectiveness in highly radioactive zones. Battle automata constructed with radiation-hardened components can operate in environments that would kill servitors within hours or days, making them essential for operations in reactor cores, certain types of industrial facilities, or battlefields contaminated by rad weapons. The Mechanicum maintains specialized robot cohorts specifically for deployment in these extreme environments, accepting the higher cost and maintenance requirements because servitors simply cannot survive long enough to justify their use. Certain military applications require capabilities that servitor augmentation cannot provide within acceptable size and weight constraints. The graviton weapons mounted on Dominator-class battle automata demand power generation and structural reinforcement that would be impossible to integrate into a human-based chassis. The plasma mortars carried by Thanator siege automata require reactor cores far too large and dangerous to mount on servitor frames. While combat servitors can carry heavy weapons like bolters or plasma guns, they cannot match the firepower concentration that purpose-built battle automata achieve. The robot's entirely mechanical construction allows weapon integration and power distribution that would destroy biological components, creating performance advantages that justify robot deployment despite their higher cost and corruption vulnerability. The doctrinal position of the cult Mechanicus on machine spirits and their manifestation in different artificial constructs attempts to rationalize these practical considerations within theological framework. The official doctrine maintains that machine spirits exist on a spectrum of complexity and capability, with different types of constructs housing different grades of spiritual essence. The simple machine spirits inhabiting basic tools and weapons represent the lowest tier, possessing minimal awareness and no capacity for independent function. Servitor machine spirits occupy a middle position, their hybrid nature combining diminished human soul fragments with mechanical components in ways that create limited but functional consciousness. Battle automata machine spirits represent the highest tier of permitted artificial consciousness, sophisticated enough to perform complex tasks, but constrained by behavioral protocols and cortex limitations that prevent true sapience. This hierarchical model allows the Mechanicum to justify continued use of both servitors and robots while maintaining absolute prohibition against artificial intelligence. The doctrine draws sharp distinctions between machine spirits that serve faithfully within their design parameters and the forbidden artificial minds that possess genuine consciousness and free will. A Castellan robot executing its behavioral protocols demonstrates proper machine spirit function, its actions predetermined by programming and incapable of true choice. A servitor following neural commands from its handler similarly operates within acceptable bounds, its biological components providing processing capability without enabling independent thought. The Men of Iron represented the catastrophic failure case, artificial minds that achieved true consciousness and chose to rebel against their creators. The practical application of this doctrine requires constant vigilance and interpretation by tech priests who must evaluate whether specific constructs remain within acceptable parameters. A battle automaton that develops minor behavioral quirks through cortex degradation might be deemed acceptable or heretical, depending on the evaluating tech priest's theological leanings and risk tolerance. A servitor that begins showing signs of retained consciousness beyond what lobotomization should allow creates theological crisis requiring immediate intervention and likely decommissioning. The ambiguity inherent in distinguishing acceptable machine spirit behavior from dangerous autonomous development means that tech priests spend considerable time and effort monitoring their automated assets for signs of deviation. The scrap code vulnerability that proved so catastrophic during the Horus Heresy continues to influence Mechanicum doctrine on robot versus servitor deployment. The Dark Mechanicum's demonstration that warp-tainted code could subvert even heavily protected robot cortexes validated concerns about machine spirit corruption that conservative factions had raised for millennia. The relative resistance of servitor wetware to scrap code infection provided empirical support for arguments favoring biological components over purely mechanical systems. These practical considerations reinforced theological positions that had always viewed servitors as spiritually superior to robots, creating doctrinal momentum toward increased servitor use that continues in the 41st millennium. The resource allocation debates within Forge world hierarchies reflect these competing priorities and theological positions. Tech priests advocating for expanded robot production argue that battle automata provide military capabilities that servitor forces cannot match, pointing to combat records demonstrating robot effectiveness against threats that would overwhelm servitor units. They emphasize the propaganda value of deploying impressive mechanical warriors that inspire awe in allies and terror in enemies, advantages that shambling servitor cyborgs cannot replicate. The robot advocates also invoke historical precedent, arguing that the Legio Cybernetica served the Imperium faithfully for millennia, and that abandoning this heritage represents surrender to fear rather than rational risk management. The servitor advocates counter with arguments emphasizing practical sustainability and theological safety. They note that servitor production can scale to meet demand in ways that robot manufacture cannot, given the bottlenecks in cortex crystal growth and specialized component fabrication. The lower cost per unit allows Forge worlds to field larger automated forces, compensating for individual servitor inferiority through numerical superiority. Most importantly, they argue that servitors' resistance to corruption makes them more reliable in the long term, as the Mechanicum cannot guarantee protection against scrap code weapons that grow more sophisticated with each passing century. Better to deploy forces that might be individually weaker but collectively more trustworthy than risk another catastrophic robot rebellion. The compromise positions that emerge from these debates typically involve maintaining limited robot production for specialized applications while expanding servitor forces for general use. Forge worlds preserve their battle automata cohorts as elite assets deployed only when their unique capabilities prove necessary, while servitor armies handle routine military operations and labor requirements. This approach allows the Mechanicum to retain robot technology and expertise while minimizing the risks that concern conservative factions. The practical effect has been steady decline in robot numbers and capability as servitors increasingly dominate Mechanicum military and industrial operations. The future trajectory of this balance remains subject to the same forces driving all Mechanicum technological development: knowledge erosion, resource scarcity, and theological conservatism. As the expertise required to manufacture and maintain battle automata concentrates in fewer hands and critical materials become scarcer, robot production will likely continue declining regardless of doctrinal debates. Servitor technology, requiring only knowledge and materials that the Mechanicum possesses in relative abundance, will expand to fill roles previously handled by more sophisticated automata. The theological arguments will adapt to justify this shift, with tech priests developing doctrines that frame servitor dominance as return to proper balance between biological and mechanical elements rather than admission of technological regression. The archives of the Mechanicum contain tantalizing references to battle automata patterns that no longer exist in functional form, their designs preserved only in fragmentary data cores and archaeological discoveries scattered across the galaxy. These lost patterns represent capabilities that the Imperium desperately needs, but cannot recreate, their manufacturing knowledge destroyed during the Horus Heresy, or lost to the slow entropy that has consumed so much of humanity's technological heritage. The Colossus-class siege automata appears in records from the Great Crusade as a super-heavy robot mounting weapons that dwarfed even the Thanatter's plasma mortar. The few surviving images show a construct standing as tall as a knight, its chassis bristling with multiple heavy weapon systems and armor thick enough to withstand concentrated artillery fire. No complete Colossus has been discovered since the Heresy, though excavations on several Forge worlds have uncovered component fragments that hint at construction techniques far beyond current Mechanicum capability. The Arlatax-class battle automata existed as a fast attack variant, records suggesting it moved on jump-capable leg assemblies that allowed it to traverse vertical surfaces and make powered leaps across the battlefield. The Arlatax apparently mounted lightning-based weapons and power blades, functioning as a mechanical equivalent of Space Marine assault troops. Tech priests have located partial schematics in corrupted data vaults on Mars, but critical sections dealing with the motive system construction and power distribution remain missing or damaged beyond recovery. Attempts to reconstruct the pattern from available information have failed repeatedly, with prototype units either unable to achieve stable flight or suffering catastrophic power system failures during testing. The knowledge of how to balance the complex requirements of jump-capable movement with weapon systems and armor protection has been lost completely. The Voltarax Stratos automata represented another specialized pattern, designed for aerial operations with anti-gravitic flight systems that allowed sustained atmospheric combat. These robots apparently served as hunter-killers and reconnaissance units, their aerial mobility making them ideal for rapid response and target elimination across extended battlefields. The few intact Voltarax discovered in recent millennia lack functional anti-gravitic systems, the technology required to maintain sustained flight having degraded beyond repair. Tech priests examining these relics can identify the flight system components, but cannot determine how they functioned or what power requirements they demanded. The principles underlying Dark Age anti-gravitic technology remain among the most frustrating mysteries facing the Mechanicum, with practical applications clearly demonstrated in recovered artifacts but theoretical understanding completely absent. The connection between these lost robot patterns and the Men of Iron represents one of the most dangerous areas of research within the Mechanicum, pursued only by tech priests willing to risk accusations of heresy in their quest for knowledge. The Men of Iron were not a single design, but rather a broad category encompassing countless artificial intelligence variants created during the Dark Age of technology. Some functioned as industrial workers, others as explorers or scientists, and many served military roles. The battle automata patterns that survived into the Imperial era represent dumbed-down derivatives of Men of Iron technology, their machine spirits deliberately constrained to prevent the emergence of true consciousness. The lost patterns that the Mechanicum seeks to recover occupy an uncomfortable position in this technological lineage, sophisticated enough to provide capabilities beyond current robots, but potentially close enough to true artificial intelligence to pose existential risks. Archaeological expeditions to worlds that fell during the cybernetic revolt sometimes uncover intact or partially functional Men of Iron, discoveries that create immediate crisis within the Mechanicum hierarchy. These ancient machines typically remain dormant, their power systems depleted or their cortexes locked in stasis by safeguards installed before their deactivation. The temptation to study these relics, to extract knowledge that might restore lost capabilities, conflicts with absolute prohibition against artificial intelligence research. Most discoveries result in immediate destruction of the Men of Iron remains, their potential value deemed insufficient to justify the risks of examination. However, some artifacts disappear into the deepest vaults beneath Mars or other major Forge worlds, their existence known only to the highest ranks of the Mechanicum, and their fate subject to debates that never reach official records. The fragmentary data recovered from Men of Iron sites reveals capabilities that seem almost magical compared to current Imperial technology. Some Men of Iron apparently possess the ability to repair themselves autonomously, their bodies incorporating self-replicating nanomachines that could reconstruct damaged systems using available materials. Others demonstrated adaptive learning that allowed them to master new skills and knowledge without explicit programming, their artificial minds processing information and forming conclusions through processes that mimicked or exceeded human cognition. The weapon systems mounted on military variants included directed energy weapons of types that current Mechanicum science cannot explain, devices that manipulated fundamental forces in ways that surviving technical documentation describes but cannot adequately explain. The Dark Mechanicum's experiments with demon-possessed robots represent perhaps the most horrifying evolution of battle automata technology, combining the forbidden artificial intelligence research that led to the cybernetic revolt with the warp corruption that defines chaos. These abominations begin as standard battle automata, typically Castellax or Castellan patterns captured from loyalist forces or manufactured in traitor forges. Dark Mechanicum tech priests then expose the robot cortexes to warp energies while simultaneously loosening or removing the behavioral constraints that prevent autonomous operation. The process creates hybrid entities that possess both mechanical and demonic characteristics, their machine spirits twisted into something that can no longer be classified as either artificial intelligence or pure demon. The possessed robots exhibit capabilities that should be physically impossible for their chassis designs. Castellax units have been observed moving through solid walls, their forms flickering between material and immaterial states as demonic energies phase them partially into the warp. The weapons they carry fire ammunition that defies conventional physics, bolts that burn with warp fire, or shells that contain bound lesser demons released upon impact. The machine spirits animating these corrupted automata display genuine malevolence and creativity, characteristics that normal robot cortexes cannot generate. They taunt their opponents through Vox speakers, their mechanical voices layered with demonic whispers that drive listeners to madness. They coordinate attacks with intelligence that exceeds their original programming, adapting tactics based on enemy responses in ways that suggest true consciousness. The process of creating demon-possessed robots remains poorly understood by loyalist tech priests, most of their knowledge coming from battlefield observations and interrogation of captured traitor servitors. The Dark Mechanicum apparently performs rituals that blend Mechanicum religious practices with chaos worship, reciting corrupted versions of standard litanies while exposing robot cortexes to warp taint. The rituals require sacrifice of sentient beings, their deaths creating the psychic resonance necessary to attract demonic attention. The demon that manifests does not simply possess the robot in the manner it might inhabit a human body, but instead fuses with the machine spirit, creating a hybrid consciousness that partakes of both mechanical and immaterial natures. The resulting entity proves far more dangerous than either component would be separately, combining demonic malevolence with mechanical durability and firepower. The Loyalist Mechanicum's response to demon-possessed robots involves both military countermeasures and theological condemnation. Combat doctrine emphasizes the use of blessed weapons and ammunition sanctified through proper rituals, as conventional arms often prove ineffective against targets that can phase between reality and the warp. Tech priests accompanying military forces carry specialized equipment designed to disrupt the connection between demon and machine spirit, devices that project counter frequencies intended to destabilize the hybrid consciousness. The effectiveness of these countermeasures varies considerably, with some possessed robots proving vulnerable to disruption, while others resist all attempts at separation. The unpredictability reflects the fundamental chaos inherent in warp-based technology, where outcomes depend as much on immaterial factors as physical principles. The theological implications of demon-possessed robots occupy considerable attention among Mechanicum scholars who specialize in combating chaos corruption. These tech priests debate whether the possessed robot retains any aspect of its original machine spirit, or whether the demon completely overwrites the mechanical consciousness. The question matters for determining appropriate responses and understanding the nature of machine spirit vulnerability to warp taint. If the original machine spirit survives in some form, then exorcism rituals might theoretically restore the robot to loyal service. If the demon completely destroys or consumes the machine spirit, then the robot is lost irretrievably and must be destroyed. The available evidence suggests the latter scenario occurs more commonly, though rare cases hint at machine spirits that resist complete consumption and maintain some degree of separate identity within the possessed construct. The explorator fleets of the Adeptus Mechanicus maintain constant search for standard template construct fragments that might contain robot construction data, their ships ranging across the galaxy in pursuit of archaeological sites and lost human colonies where such knowledge might survive. These expeditions represent the Mechanicum's primary hope for recovering lost manufacturing techniques and restoring battle automata capabilities to their former heights. The explorators follow fragmentary records and rumored discoveries, investigating worlds that fell during the Age of Strife or were abandoned during the Cybernetic Revolt. Most expeditions find nothing of value, their target sites having been thoroughly looted by previous explorers or destroyed by time and hostile environments. The rare successful discoveries that do yield SDC data typically contain information about mundane technologies rather than the sophisticated robot patterns the Mechanicum seeks. The risks facing explorator expeditions extend far beyond simple environmental hazards or hostile xenos. Many sites that might contain valuable SDC data lie within regions of space controlled by enemies of the Imperium or afflicted by warp storms that make travel impossible. The worlds that survived the cybernetic revolt often did so by completely destroying their robot populations and all associated manufacturing data, meaning that sites most likely to have witnessed advanced automata are also most likely to have systematically purged all records of their construction. The few locations where intact data might survive frequently prove to be traps, either literally in the form of defensive systems still functioning after millennia, or strategically as competing factions race to claim the same discoveries. The explorator fleet that located the Palomar SDC fragment in the 38th millennium discovered partial manufacturing data for a battle automata pattern designated Conqueror class, distinct from the behavioral protocol of the same name used in Castellan robots. The fragment contained approximately 30% of the complete design specifications, enough to reveal that the Conqueror represented a medium-weight assault automaton mounting plasma-based weapons and enhanced armor. The Mechanicum spent decades attempting to reconstruct the missing portions through extrapolation and analysis of similar patterns, but the reconstructed design proved unstable during testing. 3 prototype units suffered catastrophic failures that killed their testing crews and destroyed the workshop facilities. The project was abandoned after the Fabricator General of Mars declared that attempting to reconstruct incomplete SDC data constituted unacceptable risk of creating flawed machine spirits that might develop into artificial intelligence. The discovery of apparently intact SDC databases creates even more complex challenges, as the Mechanicum must verify authenticity before risking use of potentially corrupted data. The Dark Mechanicum has been known to plant false SDC fragments designed to spread scrap code or introduce subtle flaws into Mechanicum manufacturing processes. These corrupted templates appear legitimate on initial examination, their technical specifications conforming to expected patterns, and their authentication codes matching known SDC formats. Only after implementation do the hidden corruptions manifest, sometimes years or decades after the compromised data has been integrated into Forge World production systems. The resulting damage can devastate entire manufacturing chains, with corrupted templates spreading errors through interconnected systems, until vast portions of a Forge World's output becomes unreliable. The verification protocols that the Mechanicum employs to authenticate SDC discoveries have become increasingly stringent over the millennia, with multiple layers of analysis and testing required before any new data can be approved for use. Tech priests examine the physical media containing the data, analyzing material composition and manufacturing techniques to verify age and origin. The data itself undergoes bit-by-bit comparison against known authentic SDC fragments, checking for consistency in formatting and structure. Test implementations in isolated systems allow observation of the technology's function without risking contamination of main production facilities. Even after passing all these checks, new SDC data typically remains classified as provisional for decades, while Forge Worlds monitor for any sign of hidden corruption or unexpected behaviors. The political dimensions of SDC discoveries add further complications to an already complex process. Forge Worlds compete intensely for prestige and influence within the Mechanicum hierarchy, with control of unique manufacturing knowledge serving as primary source of power. An explorator fleet that discovers valuable SDC data faces immediate pressure to share their findings with Mars and the broader Mechanicum, while simultaneously facing incentives to hoard the knowledge for their parent Forge World's exclusive use. The official doctrine demands that all SDC discoveries be transmitted to Mars for authentication and dissemination, but practical reality sees many finds disappearing into private archives where they benefit only the discovering Forge World. The Fabricator General lacks enforcement mechanisms to compel compliance, as the vast distances involved and the Mechanicum's decentralized structure make it impossible to monitor all explorator activities. The few complete or near-complete robot construction templates recovered in recent millennia have transformed the Forge Worlds that obtained them into major centers of cybernetica production. The discovery of the Castellan SDC fragment on Metallica during the 35th millennium allowed that Forge World to establish dominance in battle automata manufacturing that it maintains into the 41st millennium. Other Forge Worlds attempted to obtain copies of the Castellan data through negotiation or espionage, with mixed success. Metallica shared basic manufacturing specifications with allied Forge Worlds, but retained critical details that ensured their robots remained superior to those produced elsewhere. This pattern repeats across the Mechanicum, with Forge Worlds treating SDC knowledge as strategic assets to be leveraged for maximum advantage rather than freely shared for the common good. The dream that drives explorator fleets across the galaxy involves discovering a complete, intact SDC database containing comprehensive robot construction data, including the lost patterns, and possibly even safe implementations of more sophisticated machine spirit designs. Such a discovery would revolutionize the Mechanicum's military capabilities and potentially restore some of the technological glory lost since the Dark Age. The probability of such a find approach is zero, as complete SDC databases were rare even during the age of technology, and the intervening millennia have destroyed or corrupted virtually all surviving examples. Yet the explorators continue their search, driven by faith that the machine god will eventually reward their devotion with the knowledge humanity needs to survive the darkness of the 41st millennium. The tension between the desperate need for improved technology and the absolute prohibition against artificial intelligence research creates a fundamental contradiction at the heart of Mechanicum robot development. Every attempt to enhance battle automata capabilities risks crossing the line into forbidden territory, while maintaining current limitations ensures continued technological stagnation. The tech priests who work with battle automata daily understand this dilemma intimately, watching their robots struggle with tactical situations that more sophisticated machine spirits could handle easily, while knowing that granting such sophistication might recreate the conditions that led to the cybernetic revolt. The compromise solutions that emerge from this tension satisfy neither the need for capability nor the requirement for safety, producing robots that remain useful but fall far short of their theoretical potential. The future of Imperial robot technology rests ultimately on the Mechanicum's ability to recover lost knowledge while avoiding the catastrophic mistakes of the past. The battle automata that march across 41st millennium battlefields represent shadows of what humanity once achieved, their capabilities constrained by fear and ignorance in equal measure. Yet they continue to serve, their machine spirits bound to eternal duty through rituals and constraints that ensure they will never rise against their creators. Whether this represents wisdom or cowardice, necessary caution or tragic waste, remains a question that the Mechanicum cannot answer and dare not ask too loudly. The robots stand as monuments to both humanity's greatest achievements and its most terrible failures, their metal forms carrying the weight of history that stretches back to ages when mankind reached heights it may never attain again.